Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Senate Finance, and to our guests. Today is Wednesday, March 15th, 2023. We are going to be considering, looks like we have 9 bills before the committee today, and we are going to hear them in the following order. Senate Bill 928, 929, 876, 875, Senate Bill 75, 861, 862, 816, 832, and 805. That's 10 bills. And so we're going to hear those bills in that order unless otherwise announced. We will give the sponsors each time to present the bills. Each of our guests will be given 2 minutes. There will be a clock running, so we ask that you be mindful of that clock. And when you hear the sound, that is your invitation to say thank you very much and allow us to move on to the next witness. I also say to our guests that our members are presenting bills before other committees. So if you see them moving in and out of the room during hearings, please know we mean no disrespect to you or your presentation. We just have other bills that we are presenting in front of the other committees, and we'll get back to the room as quickly as possible. So with that, we're going to start our bill hearings for today with Senate Bill 928. Insurance credit for reinsurance model law, reciprocal jurisdictions. And I believe we have our phenomenal commissioner coming to present the bill that is sponsored by me. So we'll just do it like that. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I will be very brief. You will remember when I presented to you about the MIA a few weeks ago that I mentioned that from time to time, I'll come to you with a bill that is a credit for is an accreditation standard at the NAIC, and this is one of those bills. This is a very highly technical amendment to an existing piece of legislation that was requested by the NAIC and the Federal Office of Insurance to further clarify an issue of the commissioner's jurisdiction where it relates to credit for reinsurance and reciprocal jurisdictions. In a nutshell, insurance companies live by very strict solvency guidelines. And those very strict solvency guidelines include when they are allowed to take credit for the reinsurance that they have purchased on their balance sheet. So insurance companies sometimes buy reinsurance in order to lay off some of their risk. And in order to take credit for that, certain standards have to be met. One of the typical ways in which we would make sure that those reinsurance companies were able to stand behind those obligations was that if it was a non-US company, that is a US jurisdiction didn't regulate them, then that insurance company had to post 100% collateral in a US bank to assure that they could meet those obligations. In 2017, the United States, through the Department of Treasury, entered into bilateral agreements with the UK and the EU to agree that the US would not require that collateral posting for companies that were domiciled in the UK or the EU that met certain standards. So those became known as the covered agreements. And as a result of those treaties, which were ratified by Congress, the NAIC had to adjust its laws and its model law to assure that states followed the rules that had been adopted under the treaty. And so Maryland passed that model law in, I believe, 2019. The Federal Office of Insurance reviewed our law, and they asked that we make a technical clarifying change. And that is what is reflected in the bill. So even though our existing legislation says in section 5-917 that the commissioner may not remove a jurisdiction that meets the requirements of a reciprocal jurisdiction from the list, they've asked us to clarify that to say that we may not remove a jurisdiction specifically as defined in 5901 G1 and G2, because those happen to be the ones that are subject to the covered agreements. And so they've asked us to make that clarifying change. That is already the way the MIA interprets the language. We have no objection to that. So I've come before you to ask you to support this bill and give it a favorable report so that we can comply with the request of the Federal Office of Insurance and the NAIC. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we thank you very much for your testimony, and that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 928. We're now going to turn, colleagues, to Senate Bill 929, which is the Commissioner of Financial Regulation name and organization of office. And we have Amy Hennon here to present this bill and not me. So thank you very much. Good afternoon. You can get started.
Thank you very much. Chair Griffith, Vice Chair Klossmeyer, members of the committee. My name is Amy Hennon. I am the Legislative Director for the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation. The Commissioner sends his regrets. I'm here to speak in support of Senate Bill 929, which renames the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation to the Office of Financial Regulation. I want to thank Chair Griffith for introducing this bill, which helps us modernize our office. OCFR engages in an annual strategic planning effort, and as part of that process, we consult with stakeholders and consumer advocates. In these conversations, each group said that the office needed to modernize the name to help consumers and stakeholders better understand the office's function. The name is 110 years old. It is a bit old-fashioned. The renaming achieves a more concise and all-encompassing description of the office and its operations. Its simplification makes it easier for consumers to identify and remember the office, and dovetails nicely with our office's mission of being Maryland's consumer financial protection agency and financial services regulator. In addition to refining the office's name, the bill also slightly changes the office's structure by establishing a new position, the Deputy Commissioner for Non-Depository Activities. Currently, the office has one Deputy Commissioner who is responsible for the supervision of depository institutions. Those are your banks and credit unions. Adding another Deputy Commissioner by statute allows the Commissioner to better handle the breadth of OCFR's regulatory reach and reflects the growth of non-bank businesses, which currently amount for about 65% of our office's workload. The bill passes, there will be two Deputy Commissioners, with the existing Deputy Commissioner role being renamed the Deputy Commissioner for Depository Activities, reflecting his current role in OCFR. There will only be a minimal fiscal impact with the offices in implementing this change. Adding the new position will be funded by the non-depository fund, and existing budget appropriations can easily support the expense related to the additional position. I will note that the House unanimously passed this bill on third reader last week. And so I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair.
What is it called right now?
My office is the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation, and this would change it to the Office of Financial Regulation.
Okay, all right. Just a little confusing, but that's
Same thing with our stakeholders and the consumers. Thank you.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. A bill that simplifies things. Thank you very much for your testimony. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 929. Colleagues, we're going to call up Senator Mary Washington. She has a couple of bills before us this afternoon. She has Senate Bill 876, which is Baltimore Regional Transit Commission. And she has a panel, I believe, for that bill, if you want to call them forward.
Please do. I think you might recognize these two gentlemen.
Good afternoon, county executives. Senator Washington is also going to present Senate Bill 875. And then some of the same witnesses will be up here for that bill. And so we'll just invite her to tell us about both. And then she can get back to committee and vote on our bills. So good afternoon, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I'm Senator Mary Washington of District 43, and I'm before you today to request for your favorable report on Senate Bills 875 and 876. Just a little background. According to a recent report, the keys to economic growth and job creation in Maryland, one of the core pillars for a competitive business environment and job growth is superior transportation infrastructure with reliable funding mechanisms. An essential prerequisite of a competitive business environment includes well-funded and maintained highways, transit, port, airport infrastructure. And all of these are so that we can have a reliable transport of goods and services, but also of human beings. Last session, we passed HB 1336, the Greater Baltimore Transit Governance and Funding Commission. The commission was charged to make findings and recommendations for mass transit in particular, and also in particular to give the Baltimore region a greater input. Unfortunately, the former governor vetoed that bill. And in the opposition, it claimed that streamlining transportation agencies under the Maryland Department of Transportation would be in conflict with any efforts for interdepartmental collaboration and impedes the ability to look holistically at the state. However, we believe that it's actually quite in contrast, that in order to have a fully holistic approach, we need to recognize our specific needs of our regions. So given that there are still significant problems with the transportation system and how it's governed, we have this legislation. Now, even though there was a veto of the commission, the Baltimore Metro Council convened and our leadership appointed members from this body, as well as the House, to participate in a work group. And one of the things that, and in that work group, there were 4 recommendations or 4 bills that have come out. This committee is receiving 2 of them, and Budget and Tax has 2 of them before them. So just a little background about MTA. MTA is the nation's only large transit authority that is not governed by a board. Okay, so unlike WMATA, MTA's planning, budget, and investment decisions are ultimately made only by the governor or the Secretary of Transportation. There is little public oversight. All the decisions are not made with the greatest amount of transparency, and that has left this legislature, as well as our constituents, broadly unaware of the decision-making process and not having a full ability to advocate for priority transit programs and projects in the greater Baltimore region. Now, the Baltimore region includes Baltimore City, of course, Baltimore County, Howard County, and Anne Arundel County. And a lot of the typical challenges that are facing MTA itself. It's documented a nearly $2 billion gap in funds that are needed to maintain a suitable repair of its current assets. The transportation itself has been unreliable and has disproportionately impacted low income, as well as communities of color who depend on it to get to school, to their job centers, to health facilities. And so it ultimately impacts the growth of our state. So what this bill does is that it creates a public commission to oversee and comment on specific aspects of MTA. It gives local governments an opportunity to actively participate in the process. It affirms that MTA remains a state agency, and it still gives the governor the majority of the seats on that commission. And enacted, this bill will put us in par with other successful transit agencies across the state. Also, we need to do some research, and there needs to be some more consideration done around what our policies should be. So we suggest that they meet quarterly, that there are specific topics that need to be covered. We're also saying that it would exercise oversight of and advocacy specifically for the Baltimore region. It would review any reports that are prepared by MTA. It would review and approve an annual budget, review and approve any updates to the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan, and submit formal comment about the Consolidated Transportation Plan, and approve annual plans, and also review some of our local transit plans and services to ensure that there's better coordination among them. Again, we submitted you should have amendments that are slightly altering the membership of this committee, adding some additional members that we had forgotten in its original drafting. As proposed, we do believe that this new commission would increase transparency, collaboration, and strategic planning. So I ask your favorable report of this. Madam Chair, do you want me to, because it's kind of similar, I could go to the next one, or do you want to just do this?
Why don't we just hear the
Okay.
testimony?
All right,
on the
I
first
ask for
one,
your
so it doesn't-
favorable
yeah.
report on Senate Bill 876.
Okay, so the witnesses, your panel can go ahead and proceed as soon as they're ready.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Griffith, Vice Chair Klausmeyer, and esteemed members of the committee. I'm Calvin Ball, and I'm not only here as your Howard County Executive, but also your Chair of the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, or BMC. I want to express my support for Senate Bill 876, which came from the work of BMC's Transit Governance and Funding Work Group. I want to commend Senator Washington and all the co-sponsors for their work on this initiative. This bill before you would establish the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission in response to the recommendations proposed in the recent report. Last year, the General Assembly passed HB 1336, which formed a legislative commission to study the governance and funding of MTA. That bill, as Senator Washington indicated, was vetoed by Governor Hogan. And as a result, BMC formed this work group in July to address the issues raised in HB 1336. Members were appointed from 4 of our jurisdictions, as well as the legislature and the business community and labor. All our communities expect bold leadership from elected representatives, but they also expect a voice to be deliberative, transparent, and accountable in the decision-making process. The cancellation of the red line blocked funding, growth, and opportunity that would have helped firm up the economic foundation of the communities in Baltimore region for decades to come. Our system here in Maryland allowed this decision to go unchecked, and the oversight structure outlined in this bill would provide an important guardrail with stakeholders and communities across the region, building consensus on transit decisions. When while we've fallen behind, it's not too late. This bill provides a path for setting a new standard in transit governance and finally delivering for our communities. With that, I ask that you please support Senate Bill 876, and I will now pass it over to County Executive Stuart Pitt.
Thank you, County Executive Ball. And thank you for everybody on this committee for hearing this important issue. And it's wonderful to see Anne Arundel County so well represented on this committee. All 3 over here to my left. You know, the slogan for our county that I use and that is on our signs is the best place for all. But there was a county executive not long ago, Jim Lighthizer, who called Anne Arundel County the crossroads of Maryland. Completely different concept. And we have within this crossroads, whether you're going north, south, east, or west, some of the biggest employers. We have Fort Meade, we have BWI Airport, and we have folks moving from county to county into and out of Baltimore City. We have the light rail that comes down from Baltimore City to the Cromwell Station. That is the place where we want to get more riders to go up to those Oriole games and use the train. And the system is struggling. We know that it needs to be improved. The fact that we are of the 35 biggest systems in the country, we're the only ones that does not have that engagement from the local officials through a commission like this makes this bill seem to be a no-brainer to me. We all serve on the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, the county executives do, and we've been doing this work for quite some time. And this is the next step in the work to create the structure to make sure that no governor alone, no one person alone will be making decisions about what transit projects go through and which ones are canceled. And so, you know, I tell people in our county all the time that we have, I understand that traffic and climate and health are the most important issues, and they know that we need a better transit system. So I really look forward to appointing people to this commission, really look forward to getting this going. And I'd like to pass it over to Mike Kelly here, who's going to give you some more details from the Baltimore Metropolitan Council.
Thank you, County Executive. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. I'm Mike Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Council. Our main function is helping Baltimore City and surrounding jurisdictions handle regional transportation planning. And as the Senator mentioned, last summer, our board put together a task force to study this issue. The board includes these 2 gentlemen here. Our Senate representative is Senator Ferguson. and Delegate Bridges on the House. And it really, the crux of this bill is that it brings MTA in line with every other major system in the country by having a board. We're really an anomaly in that fact. It maintains MTA's status as a state agency. And to that point, the suggested leadership of this commission gives a 1-vote majority to the governor. So all it really does is bring local governments to the table. And when you're talking about local governments managing land use and the state managing transit, this commission is going to provide a marriage where those two things can be better blended and we can better build out our system. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end that folks may have.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, it's a privilege to be here on the sponsors panel and with these esteemed leaders of our local jurisdictions. I'm John Laria. I'm the managing partner of Ballard Spahr's Baltimore office. We're a national law firm with offices in Baltimore and DC and a practice that includes all of Maryland. I'm also the chair of the Greater Baltimore Committee's Transportation and Mobility Committee. The GBC, as you may know, is a 68-year-old organization whose members are the largest businesses and institutions in Greater Baltimore, plus many, many others. And I was fortunate to be a business community representative on the BMC work group. With our counterparts at the Greater Washington Partnership, last year we launched the Baltimore's Transit Future campaign, which intends to create a world-class public transit system in Greater Baltimore. The campaign is supported by more than 65 businesses, anchor institutions, nonprofits, and labor organizations ready to partner with the public sector on transit. And I think you have written testimony from the coalition as well and from its members. The campaign importantly commits CEOs and other leadership from the business and institutional community to something that is critically important to our tens of thousands of employees who need a reliable, safe, and equitable way to get to work and return home and access essential services like shopping and medical care. Transit improvements are also essential for the region's inclusive growth and shared prosperity. The lack of collaboration between state and local leaders in the planning, funding, and operations of Baltimore's transit system has hampered the development of a 21st century regional system that can adequately support economic growth, workforce development and mobility, and especially the needs of the region's most disenfranchised communities. Via the commission that the bill would create, it would help ensure that the governance and funding structure of the system is 1, consistent with national best practices, as you have heard, and 2, more responsive to the needs of the region's residents, businesses, and institutions, and the local governments who serve them. Respectfully ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Beidle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and what an impressive panel. And I'm a big supporter of improving transportation in Maryland, but as I read the bill, I'm trying to figure out, you have a mission to advocate and recommend, but can you really be the decision makers?
So the answer, the approval powers requested in the bill, and there's some amendments that have gone through the House that are going to come over as well. There's a legislatively created plan called the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan that was passed within 2016. This group would approve updates to that. Initially, the suggestion was that this group would approve the MTA administrator's budget request at the request of MDOT. I believe that language has changed to essentially submit formal comment on. Unless an actual authority were created, you wouldn't have this group being the decision makers, but it really does for the first time bring local governments to the table while maintaining MTA's connection to the trust fund, which is really the largest benefit of the system. So it was sort of the path down the middle that worked for everyone.
So for an administration that is willing to take recommendations, this can be very beneficial.
Yeah.
For a different administration, I start to say prior, but I'm gonna say for a different administration, obviously anything that we tried to have input into the budget for transportation was really fell on deaf ears. So I just want to make sure that you have the teeth that you need to make the recommendations that can make the changes that we need. And I'm just not sure this bill, not that we shouldn't have the bill, but I'm not sure this bill does what we need to do ultimately.
So I would defer to the, go ahead,
I
Senator.
can address that, Senator. So I said there are 4 bills altogether and they work together. And I think because these are commissions that these bills were assigned to your committee, to this committee for the commission, but there are 2 other pieces that so I also served on the work group. And so what we were trying to develop is a path towards entities that have more ability to fund, to perhaps receive direct federal funding, to, if someday it makes sense to become an authority, that it learns to crawl before we walk.
Okay.
And so it's a very deliberate attempt, but I feel so while you don't see those, and also respecting, the existing governor and his authority and responsibility, this does walk that path, but the intent is to provide a vehicle for there to be more ability for self-determination for the Baltimore region.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and Senator and executives and everyone. Thank you for this bill. And I'm just reading through the synopsis, and I think it was partially, my question partially answered as far as approving the annual budget of the MTA. So the MTA, of course, is a statewide agency and responsibility for projects all over the state. So I was just concerned about a regional commission having that kind of control over a statewide agency. So
Right. So
could
there's
you-
amendments to
okay,
address that part.
okay. So where are those amendments? Are they?
You have them?
We have-
Okay.
Okay, and so that will be addressed by the amendments and,
Yes, sir.
okay, great. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any other questions for the sponsor or this panel on this bill? We thank you all very much for your testimony, for participating. It's always good to see our county executives
Always good
and
to see
other,
you
I
too.
think the other two are staying around for the next bill. So thank you all very much.
Yes.
So that will conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 876. Colleagues, we're going to turn now to Senate Bill 875. And that is the Baltimore Regional no, we just did that one.
Right.
Task Force to Study the Reconstruction of the Maryland Transportation Commission. Senator Washington.
Thank you. Madam Chair, again, as I said, these bills work together. So if we're going to incorporate or contemplate a Baltimore Regional Transit Commission, we need to contemplate and figure out how to reconstitute the Maryland Transportation Commission that was established in 1971. And it was first established to study state transportation system. And it was to provide advice and transportation, to provide advice to the Secretary of Transportation and the Department of Transportation. So it has also morphed to having more power over decisions. And so currently it has 17 members, 10 are appointed by the governor and 7 serve ex officio. The current description of the commission says that the Maryland Transportation Commission shall consider any requests for the dedication of transportation facilities in memory of or in honor of individuals or groups of significance. That was sort of the last, we looked at a lot of the minutes, the recent minutes of the commission, and that was one of the most substantive things we found. So we do believe that the MTA could have the MTC is largely ceremonial in its current function, and we want to change or look at how we might constitute or shift the focus so that it can better fulfill its vital role. The problems that that require policymakers like us, or we as policymakers, to deliberate upon, and that we're asking this task force to look at under SB 875, is essentially the overconcentration of power and decision-making. It was raised, the cancellation of the red line having tremendous economic impact for generations, absolutely. The way in which that was made with very little input. Have to address that there are limited opportunities for review and feedback from statewide investments, on statewide investments from local governments and the public. So currently, as it's currently constituted, there's very little formal way to have input. There's really no incentives. We know that regionalism is very important. That's a policy value of this body, of this governor, and has been for a long time. There are no incentives for regionalism, and there are no sort of way to include regional priorities. We also want to address that there is a lack of clarity about how MDOT uses the Consolidated Transportation Program to allocate the federal dollars that we receive. So there's a lack of clarity there, and we believe that there's an opportunity through this task force to really look at that and to give some preference over transit projects over some road making. The bill seeks to improve the CTP process to make a more transparent and equitable transportation system, looking at the governance structure. So this bill is also a recommendation of the Baltimore Metropolitan Council Transit Governance and Funding Work Group. And you will see the things that the task force that it's going to do. It's going to look at its statutory duties and whether it's performing to those, whether we need to revise the membership of the commission, how the commission could better fulfill its role while complying with mandates, whether the commission would have the authority to approve some modal plans for different business units that, for SHA and some of the other transportation oriented divisions within state government. And there is an amendment to add two representatives from labor onto this task force. I asked for, thank you so much. SB 875 aims to develop much needed improvements to our statewide transportation program. And we believe its recommendations will positively impact all Marylanders. Thank you for your time, and I ask for your favorable report on Senate Bill 875. And these are my panelists who you met under the last panel, and they both have brief statements.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. This bill essentially seeks to empower this commission to live up to its sort of statutorily mandated duties already. And really, it, I think, opens a conversation about the CTP process, which I believe even the Secretary has said may be time to change. The annual tour and these other programs to provide local input on the CTP have not been modernized in decades. And this commission will provide an opportunity to do that. It was initially intended to be this high-level advisory group to the governor and secretary, and the strong suggestion from our work group was to make it that again. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, again, John Laria from representing the Greater Baltimore Committee, where I chair the Transportation and Mobility Committee. I will not give you the entire recital of the things I said last, but I'll focus specifically on this bill to say that, as Mike just said, the CTP process really offers little opportunity for local governments and the public to weigh in on this critical plan in a meaningful way. In fact, and in truth, the CTP process is actually the subject of some quiet derision because it promises and advertises input when the input really doesn't ever amount to very much. That would change if this bill were enacted. The commission is not very impactful now, but reconstituting it, including allowing it to, in particular, to approve the draft and final CTP will mean real public vetting and necessary input from the stakeholders of all of our state's transportation investments. It will also ensure, as you've heard, that political changes don't disrupt major projects, something that those of us in proximity to the red line know all too well. We are truly blessed in Maryland with the financial and human resources to develop and implement a world-class transportation plan and system, and a reconstituted Maryland Transportation Commission will help us get there. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions for the sponsor or the panel? Seeing none, thank you very much. That will conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 875. We'll now turn to Senate Bill 75, Insurance and Maryland Medical Assistance Program. Senator Carter.
Thank you, Madam
Good
Chair.
afternoon.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Senator Jill Carter, Baltimore City District 41, and I'm pleased to present this bill. I think this is a really important bill. I've had a lot of conversations with people that have offered support of the bill and said that it's something that's much needed. In recent times, we've seen some noted people talk about their battles with alopecia areata. Notable Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley came out and talked about how she was diagnosed with alopecia areata and the devastating impact it has on persons, their psyche, their confidence, ability to function in the world. Recently, last year at the Oscars, Jada Pinkett Smith, a Baltimore person who had talked about being diagnosed with alopecia, the famous slap with Will Smith and Chris Rock was actually ostensibly based on Chris Rock's joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's alopecia. I just bring those things up to highlight that these are celebrities and people that are notable. They have a lot of money and they can afford treatments and head coverings if they so choose. I also think it's notable that each one of them has chosen not to opted out of hair coverings, but nevertheless, there are people that are not celebrity in the real world that really do need these things. And so what does this bill do? It requires that Medicaid, subject to limitations of the state budget, provide coverage for one, hair prosthesis wigs for a Medicaid recipient whose hair loss results from alopecia areata, and two, prescription drugs and medical devices approved by the United States U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, for treatment of alopecia areata. The bill also expands current mandated health insurance benefits for coverage for hair prosthesis to include coverage for an enrollee or insured whose hair loss results from alopecia areata if the hair prosthesis is prescribed by attending physician or enrollee or insured. As medical experts and other witnesses will explain, alopecia develops when the body attacks its own hair follicles, which can cause hair loss anywhere on the body. Most people develop it during childhood or their teen years. Some children who suffer from alopecia areata have significant psychological distress and anxiety and depression, which is common once diagnosed. Because hair loss caused by alopecia areata can greatly affect a person's quality of life, especially women, and treatment is beyond the financial reach of most people, requiring Maryland Medical Assistance Program, certain insurers, nonprofit health services plans, and health maintenance organizations to provide coverage for hair prosthesis, prescription drugs, and approved medical devices is necessary for the treatment of alopecia areata. Insurance coverage of alopecia would give great hope to patients, especially those living with widespread hair loss. I also want to note that the impetus for this bill initially was that I had a staffer whose family member suffered with it, and he was the person that brought this to me. Upon discovery, it is a real issue, and I really believe that we should move to passing it. With that, I'll remain silent and let you hear from the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have witnesses on a virtual panel, so we'll ask for Gary Sherwood.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, you have them. I forgot that. All of my panel witnesses are virtual.
Yes.
And you should have Dr. Jill Albritton,
Yes.
Gary Sherwood, and Julie Yo.
Yes, we do. They're
Okay,
all on
thank you.
screen. Thank you. Okay, so what I was saying, we'll go in the following order, just so you all know that are here joining us virtually. We'll hear from Gary Sherwood, Julie Wu, and then Jill Albritton in that order, and you each have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Gary Sherwood. I'm the Communications Director at the National Alopecia Areata Foundation, based in San Rafael, California. We thank Senator Carter for authoring this legislation, which is very important. Just to give you some quick background, alopecia areata, as the Senator mentioned, is an autoimmune disease. It has a lifetime risk of 2%. And so if you take a population like Maryland, which is 6.2 million souls, that equates out to about 120,000 Marylanders who will be affected by alopecia areata at some time in their life. So you can see the impact that this legislation can have. The price of wigs can sometimes be exorbitant, anywhere from several hundred to several $1,000s. Most insurance carriers will not cover the purchase of a wig for an alopecia areata patient. They erroneously consider alopecia areata to be a cosmetic condition. It is not. There are multiple studies proving the psychosocial component of this very serious disease. Most carriers will cover the cost of a cranial prosthetic or a wig for a cancer patient. If they can do that for cancer patients, they should also be able to do the same for alopecia areata patients. Again, we wish to thank the senator for authoring this legislation, and we thank you for hearing us today.
Thank you. You can proceed, Julie, you.
Thank you, Senator Carter. I actually have my daughter Allison and our support leader Lindsay waiting in the queue, and be great if they could join us as well if they can. But my name is Julie Yu. I have two daughters who have alopecia areata. Our family's been living with alopecia for the last 12 years. And we started Alopecia Justice League about 18 months ago with Allison, my daughter, Lindsay Sullivan, who is a NAF support group leader, with Gary's support and Dr. Lucico, our dermatologist. And really the mission of Alopecia Justice League is to increase awareness for alopecia, at the same time support the wig bill. So we're really excited to have this opportunity. Alopecia has really been a key connector for our family and for the community itself. We still remember the first time we went to a wig store to find my, back then 5-year-old daughter. There were not that many options, and I was shocked that the wig available for Allison at the time she was 5 is $2,500. And it was after many attempts of searching, and we called insurance companies multiple times, and it wasn't covered under insurance. So we have taken this as a family mission, and we are working with NAF and others to really advocate for this bill, because alopecia is not it's not a choice. Wigs should be an option. It should be really covered through insurance. So thank you for your support.
Thank you. Dr. Britton, Al Britton.
Yeah, so Al Britton, hi. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify. I am a dermatologist, dermatopathologist. I've been in Maryland since 1988 and did all my training in Maryland. On behalf of the Maryland Derm Society, testifying in support of Senate Bill 75, which would be a critical step to ensure patients with hair loss from alopecia areata have access to prescription medications and for hair prostheses, wigs. Alopecia areata causes very visible hair loss, and it's often in kids. There are treatments for alopecia areata, but they're costly. Not all families can afford the cost or the time you have to put in for the treatments. And even if you can afford the cost, it's not always successful. So you're left with a young person with visible hair loss. And that, of course, you can imagine having your high school student or your grade school student in school with baldness, maybe baldness over their whole body or just portions of their scalp, but it's very visible. And so that leads to body imaging problems, not fitting in with their peers because they look different. There are multiple quality of life studies that show that access to treatment and access to wigs actually increase quality of life in these folks. So I urge you to support Senate Bill 75, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some others who've joined us in the Zoom room, so we're going to go ahead and take all of the testimony, and then we'll open it up to the committee to see if you have any questions for the sponsor or those that have joined us. So we'll hear from Kelly Barta, Dr. Laura Burrows, then Allison Lee, and Lindsay Sullivan. And so as soon as the person in front of you is done, you can go ahead and unmute and start your testimony. Thank you. So Kelly.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to address this hearing today. My name is Kelly Barta. I am the president of the Coalition of Skin Diseases, and we are a national umbrella organization of 25 national nonprofits based in DC, but all of these are focused on skin disease. Several of them are patient groups, including NAF, that deal with alopecia areata. So we just want to voice our support for Senate Bill 75. Alopecia areata has a lifetime risk of 2%, which means as many as 6 million people in the US or 120,000 of those in Maryland could be affected. And then, as we heard just recently, while many skin diseases are considered to be cosmetic in nature, these conditions are really highly impactful to individuals. The physical, social, and economic impact can be truly life-altering. So in a society where so much of a person's value is put on their outward appearance, those who appear physically different from others face stigmas and mental health impacts that can lead to isolation, depression, loss of opportunity, and quality of life. And we believe as a coalition that alopecia patients should be provided insurance coverage for wigs as part of their medical care. There are several states who have passed legislation in this regard to date: Minnesota, New Hampshire, New York, and Oregon. And on a federal level, Massachusetts Representatives Jim McGovern and Ayanna Pressley are planning to reintroduce the House bill, which reclassifies wigs as durable medical equipment eligible for Medicare coverage. And a Senate companion bill is also expected. So I want to thank the committee again for its thoughtful consideration of SB 75, and we hope that you will support its passage. Thank you.
Dr. Burrows?
Hi, I'm Dr. Laura Burrows. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm a physician. I'm also the mother of a patient who was diagnosed with alopecia areata at the age of 15. And our experience was we went to 11 doctors in 4 states and 2 countries to finally get her treatment. A lot of physicians are not aware of alopecia areata and its treatments. And this is an incredibly disfiguring condition, you know, for a 15-year-old girl to go bald and lose all of her eyelashes and eyebrows. It was incredibly traumatic for her and honestly for the family. There was the insurance coverage for breast reconstruction law passed in 1998, which mandated that women who have had mastectomies by law have to be offered breast reconstruction because it is so physically disfiguring. And I really don't see that alopecia areata is any different. It is incredibly disfiguring. It's arguably just as visible or even more so. And I would really love to see the state of Maryland be on the vanguard for having approved treatments for this condition. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Allison Lee.
Hello, my name is Allison Lee and I am 17 years old. I've had alopecia universalis, an autoimmune condition resulting in complete hair loss for the past 12 years. Because of my condition, I endure the stigma surrounding baldness daily. Long stares, whispers, and pitying smiles have become my norm. Alopecia has deeply informed my perspective regarding empowering hair loss legislation. I am the co-founder of the Alopecia Justice League, which aims to promote awareness for alopecia and hair loss legislation, including SB 75. Many deem alopecia a solely cosmetic condition, saying it's just hair. This dismissive attitude causes the alopecia community to feel marginalized and increases the risk of depression and suicide. Hair is integral to identity. Throughout history, it has held immense social implications, baldness often signifying the stripping of one's identity. This stigma surrounding baldness persists today, especially in regard to legislation. Despite the condition's psychological toll, options to alleviate the struggle, wigs, and treatment are incredibly costly. High-quality wigs made from human hair typically exceed $1,000. Further, insurance coverage for wigs is not mandated under Medicare, as wigs are not considered durable medical equipment. Wigs, the only source of improving self-image for most, should not exceed the average American's budget. Further, parents should not have to choose between their rent and their child's alopecia treatment. I still think about my first visit to a wig salon. The salon's wigs, made from human hair, seemed fit for any Disney princess. Nonetheless, this fantasy came with the upfront cost of $2,500. This experience confirmed the reality of many in the alopecia community. For comfort and durability, we must invest thousands of dollars into high-quality wigs to affirm our sense of self. The Alopecia Justice League firmly believes that everyone should be empowered to choose what to wear on their head without bearing significant financial burdens. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
And
you so
Lindsay
much.
Sullivan. Mhm.
Thank you so much. An honor to follow Allison Lee. My name is Lindsay Sullivan. I am a co-founder of the Alopecia Justice League as well. I am also the National Alopecia Areata Foundation Support Group Leader for New York. I am also the creator and host of the Very Nearly Almost podcast, and I have had alopecia areata for 28 years. As a little girl, I never could have imagined I'd be the confident woman you see today. I was bullied, I was shy, and I was in a lot of pain for a long time as a result of feeling so different from my friends and my peers. As Allison so astutely just said, many people write off alopecia as a cosmetic condition. And yet so much of the work hair loss doctors do is calling up and writing to insurance companies to give their patients the support and power of choice that they so desperately need. How we identify and how comfortable we feel to do so as our true selves is directly where our sense of well-being comes from. So to say that alopecia doesn't impact both the mental and thus physical health of those affected is ridiculous. Like my hair loss, my confidence living with alopecia also fluctuates. On the whole, and certainly on the surface, I am a successful woman, eager and enthusiastic to help other people with alopecia reclaim their narratives about themselves. Working in entertainment for my day job, I often receive compliments about rocking my baldness or turbans on Broadway red carpets or at photo shoots. I have published articles on confidently dating with alopecia and given countless pep talks to my support group attendees to put themselves out there. I love encouraging people with alopecia to step into their power and work to sustain a lifelong practice of self-love and optimism. But even I have bad days. I have opening nights where I just don't want to wear a turban this time, or I'm worried a date isn't texting me back because I didn't cover up last time we went out. Regardless of how one hopes to navigate their alopecia, be it rocking it and becoming a member of the Alopecia Justice League, looking into treatment, or selecting a wig that makes them feel great, we deserve the power of choice. I hope that you can grant that for people today.
Thank you so much for sharing your testimony and for sharing your personal experiences with the committee. Are there any questions for the sponsor or the panel? Madam Vice Chair.
Yes, besides the hair loss, does it affect any other parts of your body, or does it, is there any other illness that comes along with it? No.
Yeah, it can cause pitting to the fingernails. That's generally like the most concurrent symptom, but also Dr. Albritton, if you'd also like to chime in on any other that you've seen.
It's associated with other autoimmune diseases. So you have an increased frequency of having other ones since you have the genetic predisposition to lose this hair.
It's also quite debilitating trying to function without eyelashes and eyebrows. I mean, try taking a shower or working out without eyelashes and eyebrows. That's not cosmetic. We have that for a reason.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions for the committee. So thank you all very much for your testimony and for participating in Senate Finance's hearing. That will conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 75. Colleagues, we're now going to turn to Senate Bill 861, Consumer Protection, Scanning or Swiping in Identification Cards and Driver's Licenses Prohibition. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Colleagues, it's good to be back in finance on with our very last two bills. For the record, Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. I have two consumer protection, consumer privacy bills for you, and I will present them briefly. But there is a problem, and these bills both offer a solution. So, first. I'm not sure if you're aware, but of the 50 states, Maryland ranks 11th in terms of frequency of identity theft. And what can we do about it? The problem is that there is too easy access to our personal identifying information, and we need to try to reduce access. And one of the increasing increasingly common occurrences is businesses that demand to scan your driver's license or ID and keep your information. Now, it's totally fine to do that if you need to confirm that the driver's license is legit, that you are of an age that you're allowed to drink alcohol for valid, appropriate reasons. But too often, the data is being maintained, harvested, could be sold or not adequately protected, and then we get hacked. So you all know what your current driver's license looks like. It's got your photo, it's got your height and weight, driver's license number, home address, whether you're an organ donor, and I hope everybody watching is an organ donor, your birth date and all that. But to be clear, what the new driver's license, the Real ID driver's licenses also include is a lot more information that is not otherwise accessible. So fingerprints, biometric information, facial recognition templates, medical information, court-ordered restrictions. There's a lot of information on that barcode. And there's no reason that most folks should have access. The Attorney General has two of its people here, and they're going to share their thoughts. But I do want to mention that there are some folks who are asking for permission to scan for security reasons. And these are folks, particularly the Baltimore Jewish Council wants to make sure that whether it's an adult, a parent or guardian picking up a child at a school or after school activity or something, they want to make sure that it's the right person. But they are sharing that information with others. So if someone goes into one synagogue and then they go to the Jewish Community Center or something, all of that information is still available. It's unclear how many people have access to it and how easily shareable it is. Having said that, certainly security is a valid reason to be scanning. So if it's in the committee's wisdom to exempt something for with a valid security reason or priority, that could make sense. But I think we need to make sure that the average small business or large business doesn't sit there and say, we won't do commerce with you unless we are allowed to take all of your personal identifying information and store it who knows what and do who knows what with it. So I said I'd be brief. I'm going to be brief, and I'm going to let these two fabulous women from the Attorney General's office share their views, unless, Madam Chair, you'd like to ask me any questions first. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Devin King, and I am a law clerk with the Office of the Attorney General. We urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 861, which seeks to protect the privacy of Maryland consumers. The practice of scanning IDs has become rather common. Retail stores, doctors' offices, service providers, and office buildings frequently insist on scanning someone's ID to gain entry, receive services, or even return a product with a valid receipt. In 2021 and 2022, retailers and healthcare facilities were targets of some of the largest data breaches across the country, putting info collected from ID or licenses at risk. The bill does enumerate several exceptions for establishments with specialized verification needs or that require a scan to comply with various legal requirements. However, most companies can easily verify one's identity with a visual check rather than a scan, quite like the security process for this building. There are also safer alternatives to record keeping than storing information obtained from an ID. For example, keeping temporary records of names and phone numbers of visitors to a facility. The implementation of Real ID has increased the risk of fraud by creating a national database with birth certificates, social security cards, and other documents. And Maryland should follow the lead of the several other states that have passed similar laws to protect consumer data and prevent the unnecessary collection of it in the first place. For these reasons, we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Liz Bonomo, and I am a law clerk with the Consumer Protection Division at the Maryland Office of the Attorney General, as well as a second-year law student at the University of Maryland, a Maryland native and a resident of Baltimore City. I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 861. Chances are that someone in this room has been a victim of identity theft. In 2021, 15 million Americans, about 1 in 22 of us, were victims of schemes involving the use of our personal information for illegal financial gain. Those losses amounted to $24 billion in 2021 alone. Identity theft disproportionately impacts members of our community who are low income, as well as older adults. And as the senator mentioned, according to the FTC, Maryland currently ranks 11th in identity fraud nationally. For some, the consequences of identity theft might just be inconvenient, reporting fraudulent activity, freezing credit reports, and getting new credit cards. But for others, the impact can be devastating. Armed with your personal data, bad actors can cause financial damage that can take months to undo. And for some, the emotional and psychological toll can last even longer. It's true that scanning our driver's licenses and ID cards is just one of the many ways that identity thieves can get a hold of our personal information. And businesses and individuals who collect information by scanning may have the best of intentions. But why make it easy for these bad actors to get their hands on our personal data? Maryland should join the 12 other states that have taken steps to prevent the serious harms that identity theft causes, especially for our most vulnerable citizens. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I'm Franz Schneiderman, Consumer Auto Maryland. I'm a consumer advocate and my group works for safety, fairness, and transparency for Maryland drivers and Maryland consumers. We support this bill because it does add some important new privacy protections that are important to all consumers. We talked about how prevalent identity theft is, and it's an enormous problem for consumers to correct once it happens. But it's not just identity theft. There's all kinds of other data breaches that happen. And frankly, storing all this information exposes people to all kinds of predatory scam marketing and other things that aren't identity theft, but are really problems for consumers. And yet more and more merchants and bars and doctors' offices are insisting that we scan, we give them our information. And if you look on the internet, and I did this last night on Amazon, for $50 or $100, anybody can buy all kinds of devices that talk about how they can scan and store hundreds of addresses and all your personal information. There are even apparently phone apps that will do that now. Obviously there's all kinds of opportunities for abuse of that information. And, the problem here is that Maryland state law, as I understand it, doesn't specifically prohibit the misuse of that kind of data, which, it seems to me is something we probably should have done, some years ago. This bill, corrects that oversight, or what I take to be an oversight, and properly limits the use of the collection and use of that data to law enforcement agencies, people who oversee financial transactions, and other people who have a real need for the information. Makes it a violation of Maryland consumer protection law for other people to use or misuse that data. So I think it's really important for consumers. Hope you'll give the bill a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Guile.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, panel, for your testimony. You touched upon one instance, I guess, in which scanning of IDs occurs, and that's in healthcare facilities. And I'm thinking that's like, at least now where I am in my stage of life, the only time where I really recall handing over my ID, except when to travel, is that I hand it with my insurance card. Have the healthcare facilities or insurance companies, I always just assumed it was necessary to verify ID, for benefits, or somehow the health insurance companies somehow needed this for payment. What have you heard, at least, why they do it? I guess I'm just a little hesitant about this in case it's somehow needed for payment. So.
You want to do it and we'll follow up?
Sure. I'm not entirely sure why, but if they are required to comply with various laws, the bill will exempt them from that.
Okay, do you know, I guess, Senator Kagan, if there are requirements by insurance companies, or is this HIPAA, is there any sort of requirement that they have to scan your ID with your insurance card?
I'm not aware of it, and I was just looking at the 12 other states that have already passed this, and we have them by exemptions, and there's not an exemption for healthcare providers, which means that it's either already covered by HIPAA and it's already exempted for that reason. So just like financial institutions, if you want to buy a car, if you want to get a bank loan or something, of course they should be able to scan. Of course they should be able to get access to your data before they decide whether to take a risk on you. But some of the stories that some of you might have heard in past years, if you want to buy spray paint at Home Depot, they require you to scan your driver's license, and who knows what they do with it. That's bizarre. And there's no justifiable reason for that. If they wanted to make a photocopy of it, that might be one thing, but to scan it and have access to all of your personal identifying information and biometric information seems over the top.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that, that being unnecessary. I just know that, you know, I when looking over the materials, that's one occasion that I'm thinking of now is when my ID gets scanned. But the panel brought it up on a couple of occasions, and I think even mentioned it to have occurred with some sort of breach or somehow of accessing that there was a compromise of data related to healthcare facilities. So if you're intending to protect it, I guess I'm just wondering if there's a particular reason why they need to have this information and to ensure that we're not preventing them to have this information for payment. So thank you.
So Senator Gile, we can follow up and learn more about that and circle back. But the bottom line is anyone who has a justifiable reason to have access to the information should have access to the information. The question is, who shouldn't? And can we please try to protect ourselves so that Maryland isn't so highly rated in terms of identity theft nationally?
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Senator. I was just trying to think, and probably others, and I'll call on the members in a second. I was just thinking I had to pull my driver's license out for something recently. It was Clarendon D. I had to take it out for that. So, but they would be protected like this.
Did they swipe it or did they just verify that you are who you are?
I think they had me, I think.
See,
Yeah. But okay, let me go to
Unclear why
Senator
that's possible.
Kramer and then Senator Mounts.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, and this kind of falls in line with what the chair said. Currently identified, Senator Kagan, you've got the section does not apply to a person that uses a scanning device to scan or swipe an individual's identification card or driver's license to verify authenticity for purchase of pseudoephedrine, alcohol, and tobacco. We want to make sure they're 21. I'm assuming you would have no problem whatsoever if there were an enumerated number 4 there to include the sale of cannabis, ensuring that the buyer is 21. With that,
If only this committee had spent any time working on cannabis issues, that would have been a great point, Senator Kramer.
thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good call. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Mounts.
And how do you know if your information is being scanned? So the example that you just got where your identification card is swiped, you don't know if it's just to verify who you are or whether that information is being taken.
So there's the difference of I'm trying to get into this bar and they want to make sure that I'm over 21 because it's unclear from looking at me whether I'm old enough to go into the bar. There's the look at it and they look at my birth date, or someone who wants to buy tobacco products at a drugstore or something, they look at it. There's a swiping is literally putting it through a scanning device. Often near the cash register, but not necessarily. And just being able to then harvest your personal identifying information and store it, who knows how securely, who knows who has access to it, and it makes you vulnerable to all sorts of hacking. And as the AG's folks, the Attorney General's folks said, Maryland is ranked 11th in how often we are the victims of identity theft.
Well,
Nationally.
It's funny because you'll use the card, somebody will swipe your card. And we just did a bill dealing with the unsolicited phone calls. And within a week, for whatever you had your card swiped for, you'll get a solicitation for something in that area.
Yeah.
And so
Isn't that so? So Senator Mounts, because you have asked, I'm going to give you information that I know you were just about to ask for, which is the list of other states. And I just want to be clear, they are red and blue states, California, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Ohio, Oregon, Rhode Island, Texas, and Virginia. have all enacted laws that limit this access to our personal identifying information in this way. I just think we need to narrow the access, and it's up to this committee, if you choose to work on this, whether there's a narrowing that we can do. And maybe it's not precisely this, maybe we need a few other loopholes. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Senator. All right, we're going to go Senator Vital and Senator Hershey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I missed the very beginning of your presentation because I was in your committee.
I
during
know,
presentation.
we traded
So
places.
This barcode is where they have like my passport and what all those things I took to the motor vehicles to get my license. Is that
Correct.
what we're talking about?
Biometric information, fingerprint. I'm waiting for.
Okay.
All the information that you did, that you provided when they gave you when you got your real ID as required by law.
So all this time I thought that it was the phony unemployment claim that got my credit, but it probably was this driver's license. Thank you, Madam.
Okay, thank you, Senator Vital.
Thank you, Senator Hershey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I apologize, I missed the beginning, but Senator, is there a POS device that will just allow the age to come off of it? I mean, through a scanning where just the age comes back?
So great question. And it's something that we've explored. So here's the problem. Let's say that the technology exists. And I just want to hold up, this is the barcode we're talking about.
Right.
The back side has all of this information. So the front side, and I'm not going to hold up the whole thing here, but of my wonderful staffer, but the front side, we're all used to being able to see, you know, the photo, the address and all that, the birth date, and that's all fine. But here's the thing, you give it to someone who says, I'm just going to check your birth date, and they scan it. How would you possibly know what they're harvesting, how they're keeping it secure, who has access to it, and what else they're going to use it for? So even if the information, even if there is the technology to be quite targeted, it's unclear how the average consumer could have that confidence that that's all that would be taken.
Okay, I just wondered if the technology existed, and I know you've exempted for the purchasing of alcoholic beverages, for instance.
Or a
but-
police officer
Right.
or.
But I mean,
Yep.
if you do go to a Harris Teeter or something and you go in and you try to buy it, the light goes off and somebody comes over and they just said, show me your ID, and they just hit it with a scan and it pops up, green check mark or something like that. So that's okay, but we still don't know if that scanning pulled any information back or
So,
not, right?
so Senator, if Harris Teeter just wanted to make sure someone was of age.
Right.
As at gas stations, it says you must be born before this date in this year.
Right.
They glance at it, they can see that it's a valid driver's license. They glance at it, you're old enough, you can buy the product you're seeking. Not sure why they need to be scanning, unclear what that would.
Well, again, I think it's just the ease of self-checking out type of thing. So you go through the self-checkout, you scan across a 6-pack, the light goes on.
Yes.
They walk over to you and they say, you've got, a 6-pack of beer.
Right.
They said, show me your ID. And rather than taking the time to do the math and say that, they hit it with the scan and it pops up green check mark.
I don't know about you, but I don't think my grocery store should have access to my height,
that's what
my
I'm
weight,
wondering.
my organ donation status, my.
No, I was just wondering if
Yeah.
that's why I said, is the technology in a place where,
Right.
where some of them may just be using something that simply looks at the birth date at that time and gives them readily visible information that you are of age.
So again, I think I answered. If it exists, it's unclear
Okay,
what sort of reassurance we would have. Just to add one more thing, which is we were contacted a couple of years ago by a grocery store chain that wanted to scan everybody's driver's licenses in order to add them to the birthday club because they would get special discounts for their birthday. And I don't know how many people would be willing to sell their privacy to get a free little thing or a discount on their birthday if they knew that it made them more vulnerable to hacking. So for ease and convenience and stuff, I don't think most people would want to make that compromise.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Senator Hershey's line of questioning just set me right back to where I was a moment ago.
All right.
So if I understand correctly, because I know point of sale equipment is out there where liquor stores require that rather than leave it up to an employee who may or may not properly look at a license in order at point of sale to complete the sale of the product. So they're protecting themselves, ensuring that the purchaser at least has a document that says they're 21. They scan it, and then the purchase can be completed based on the scan of the date of birth saying that that individual is 21. Without that state ID, driver's license, whatever it may be, indicating 21 years of age, they don't, and I understand, because an employer is responsible for the transaction an employee does. So if an employee has a friend come in who's under 21 and sells them alcohol, the employer is responsible for that transaction. So I know there is point of sale equipment out there, and I just want to verify that this would not prohibit the ability of those transactions that are ensuring a record of a document that said the individual is 21. I understand you don't want it capturing additional information, and I agree, but do I understand correctly, this bill would not prohibit their ability to use point of sale equipment that verifies the age?
It specifically exempts verifying age.
Okay, so I thought.
Quick enough, Madam Chair? Quick enough.
Love it when they answer the question.
There you go.
There you go. There you go. I see no additional questions for the sponsor or this panel. So thank you all very much for your testimony. We do have additional witnesses signed up on this bill. So I'll call forward Sarah, Mike, Mickey. I was sitting here trying, but I couldn't make it work.
Spelling.
It is. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. I am Sarah Mirsky-Mickey. I'm the Deputy Director of the Baltimore Jewish Council, which represents the Associated Jewish Community Federation of Baltimore and all of its agencies. We strongly oppose SB 861 as written. SB 861 has very limited exemptions, and our JCCs, schools, synagogues, and community buildings use this type of technology to keep our community safe. It's not only our organization, but most of Maryland's public schools use these systems. One of the most popular systems is called Raptor technology. Raptor's visitor management system swipes IDs to look for people in the sex offender registry, criminal history background, and other safety measures, including storing information and saving custodial rights information to make sure children are given to their rightful custodian. This program is so important to the safety of our children that both the federal government and our state government give grants to fund these types of programs. Another system used by our JCC is called Lineal S2. This was funded by the Federal Homeland Security Grant Program, which provides grantees resources required to protect against, mitigate, and respond to and recover from acts of terror and other threats. Unfortunately for the Jewish community, ID swiping has become an effective mechanism to verify people coming and going in our communities and our institutions whose safety are continuously threatened every single day. If our state and federal government find these systems to be necessary to keep our communities safe and Marylanders safe, we should not be banning them. I do appreciate the sponsor saying that she'd be considering some kind of amendment around exempting safety. We would like to see that ahead of time. And I also wanted to clarify one point that she made. So while one synagogue does not share information with another synagogue or other Jewish institutions, our JCCs, which are part of the same organization, we have a few within the Baltimore region, do share the information. So if someone is flagged at our JCC in Baltimore City, if that person goes to our JCC in Baltimore County using the same exact system, they are protected against that. So for these reasons, as written, we ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. We do have one virtual witness on this bill. Harel Turkle signed up unfavorable. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Griffith and Vice Chair Klausmeier. Thank you for your time today. My name is Harel Turkle, and I'm the owner of a 20-year-old technology consulting firm in Baltimore. My role in speaking with you today, though, is as the Security Committee Chair of one of Maryland's largest synagogues and Jewish day schools. We implemented the Raptor ID scanning solution at our facility entrance last year, and the system has been crucial in authorizing visitors for the safety of our congregants and school children. The ability to cross-reference the National Sex Offenders Database has already identified and denied entry to various vendors and visitors, and even to parents who otherwise would have roamed the hallways filled with our preschool and K-8 children. I can appreciate the need to protect personal identification privacy. My business does just that with cybersecurity, in particular for use in marketing and solicitation, but there needs to be a carve out for schools, places of worship, and community centers, as Sarah mentioned. It is important to note as well that driver license scanning for sex offender database lookup does not infringe on personal identity protection. The information obtained through the scan is only used for the purpose of checking the sex offender registry. The information is not shared with any other parties, and the individual's identity is protected in a secure encrypted database. Additionally, many states have laws in place that require sex offenders to register their address and other personal information with law enforcement, which is then made publicly available on the sex offenders registry. This means the information obtained through driver license scanning is already publicly available and does not violate any privacy laws. So in closing, our institutions have vulnerable populations which we can protect with robust technology solutions while still maintaining the sensitivities of personal identity protection. Thank you again for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, we thank you very much for your testimony, for participating in the hearing. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 861. Colleagues, we're now going to turn to Senate Bill 862. Senator Kagan, back with consumer protection, security questions and measures. Good afternoon again, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, colleagues. For the record, Cheryl Kagan, still very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. In 2021, this committee and the General Assembly outlawed the use of mother's maiden name on bank accounts and financial institutions prospectively. We compromised with the bankers to make sure that they didn't have to go back and contact millions of account holders in order to undo the alleged security question of mother's maiden name. One of the things that those of you who are on before are aware is how easy it is to find a mother's maiden name through very quick searches online. So Lloyd, Nossel Coster, Clater, Frisbee, Hausler, Balls, Alford, Quatman we found a couple of you that were harder to find, but staff doing some very quick searches of public documents, we were able to do that. So what's the problem with getting access to your mother's maiden name? Through that, people can hack into a lot of your personal data, a lot of your personal documents, and it's just a terrible idea. They can access health records, credit information, private documents and photos, social media accounts. Too often, this is still used as an alleged security question. Now, it does go back 100 and something years when it was first used, but that was before the internet. That was before this information was so easy to find on Facebook, on Ancestry.com, in obituaries that are online and easily accessible. So Senate Bill 862 would prohibit, and I'm not trying to undo what we've already done with financial institutions. This would be prospective, but it would prohibit entities, as well as state and local government agencies, from continuing to use a mother's maiden name as a security question. Ideally, and when you set up an account for your cable service or other utilities, they usually offer a pull down. What's your favorite pet's name? What was your first grade teacher's name? Something that, or make up your own question and then tell us what the answer is that we want you to know. Sometimes it'll be pick 3. Anyway, the bottom line is mother's maiden name is a terrible idea. We want to make sure that the other problem with mother's maiden name is that it's outdated, not just as a security question, but not everybody has a mother. There are people with 2 mothers or 2 fathers, or who don't know their mother's maiden name, or there are mothers who have kept their maiden names, in which case it's a complete farce that it could ever be a security question. So it's highly searchable. It's a bad idea. As I said in the last bill hearing, Maryland is the 11th most hacked state in the country. We are victims of identity theft. Let's protect Marylanders with expanding what we did a couple years ago, not just by outlawing the use of mother's maiden name in financial institutions prospectively, but in any other kind of commercial establishments. And I am happy to take questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 862. Colleagues will now turn to Senate Bill 816, Motor Vehicle Insurance, Rate Filings, Trade Secrets, and Factors Used to Establish Rates. Senator Alonzo Washington, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. For the record, Senator Alonzo Washington here to present on your favorite bill of the day. This bill, if you all would just indulge me for a second, but if you go online and you go to your app and download your favorite car insurance company and put in the address, and then you put in your address and the amount of your premium will come up. And then if you just change that zip code across the street, it will go up significantly. I've done this. If you put in an address in 20740, your premium will be a certain amount. If you go to 20770, which is my zip code, predominantly Black neighborhood or community or zip code, my insurance went up significantly. This happens to many Marylanders every single day, particularly in Baltimore and Prince George's counties. In Maryland, if you move into a predominantly Black neighborhood, your auto insurance premiums are going to increase. This is the unfortunate truth and reality that has been the case in the state of Maryland for decades, and it continues to impact communities of color to this day. The current practice of using zip codes exacerbates costs for people of color who need the most relief out of Marylanders. Insurance companies in Maryland are not allowed to use race or income to set insurance rates. You'll hear that from them many times, but they can use a variety of other non-driving factors that act as proxies, including zip codes, to set their premiums. Maryland law allows auto insurance companies to use these non-driving related factors, quote, in predicting the likelihood that you will be in an auto accident in the future or will file a claim for damages. The research shows, and is very clear, that the use of zip codes is almost always tied to race in this state and across the country. To address this issue, again, I have your favorite bill in front of you of the day, SB 816, which requires that an insurer uses no more than 5 territories across the state of Maryland for establishing automobile insurance rates. Additionally, we are removing language from the state code that establishes rating factors as trade secrets, furthering providing additional transparency to consumers about the basis for what they are being charged. They can hide how they develop their premiums because we passed legislation to allow that. That's just unfair and not fair to the consumer to be able to understand that. Data from the Consumer Federation of America and Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition finds that the more Black people that live in a zip code, the higher the auto insurance premium charged. Their 2021 study found major disparities in Baltimore and across the state. In Madamman neighborhood, if I said that right, Senator Hayes, people pay more than $700 more on average than those in higher income, mostly white, predominantly white neighborhood of Hamden, Medfield area. The cost is about $2,400 versus $1,700. Similarly, drivers in those lower income, mostly Black Pimlico areas pay more than $600. Those in wealthier and whiter Mount Washington paid $600 more than those other areas, in those other zip codes. In Montgomery County, the same study showed that drivers in the Langley Park area paid on average $173 a year more for car insurance than those in nearby Tacoma Park, which is literally across the border. In Prince George's County, where I live, the study found that drivers in Fairmont Heights, where about 95% of the residents are people of color, were paying $274 a year more than those in majority white College Park. With our state requiring its residents to purchase auto insurance, it is imperative that we do more to ensure that it is being charged fairly, regardless of a person's background or zip code. SB 816 will make sure that auto insurance is more affordable, more equitable, and more transparent for Marylanders. For these reasons, Madam Chair and members of this committee, I respectfully request a favorable report on this legislation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Isadora Stern. I am a policy manager with Economic Action Maryland, formerly the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit that works to advance economic justice in all communities across the state through our direct service, research, education, and our advocacy work. The senator just did an excellent job explaining what this bill does and what the intention of the bill is. Right now, the use of zip code in auto insurance pricing is driving up the cost for low income people and people of color. We did release a report that the senator alluded to, and overall what we found is that this is the case across the state. The report found that on average, the premium for basic coverage decreases by $72 for every 10% increase in white population. So the bottom line is, the more diverse a zip code is, the more expensive someone's auto insurance will be. That is racial discrimination, which is illegal in our auto insurance pricing. We understand that auto insurance companies cannot use race or income to rate these pricings, but zip code is acting as a proxy to allow them to continue this discrimination. I also have a personal story. I moved from a predominantly Black zip code, 21218 in Baltimore City, to a zip code that shares a border with that zip code, 21211, which is a predominantly white zip code. And my insurance decreased by $230, actually $240. This is a huge decrease for a zip code that is one city block away from another zip code. So what this bill does is it expands the territorial ratings to 5 territories, at least 5 territories, rather than these individual zip codes, which just helps smooth out this discrimination. It balances the cost so that people aren't being charged more because of their income and their race. So thank you, and I urge a favorable report.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Michael DeLong. I'm a research and advocacy associate with Consumer Federation of America. We're an association of consumer organizations founded in 1968. We work to advance the consumer interest through research, advocacy, and education. We have a lot of experience working to make insurance more affordable and accessible. We strongly support SB 816, which will help lower auto insurance rates by requiring that auto insurers use no more than 5 territories. And it will also promote transparency by ending the classification of rating factors as trade secrets. Maryland requires drivers to purchase and maintain auto insurance, so you have a responsibility to make sure that this legislation is this product is affordable and that consumers don't experience unfair discrimination. But auto insurers they charge people dramatically different prices based on their zip codes where they live and work, and this disproportionately hurts African American drivers. We conducted a study with Economic Action Maryland, as we mentioned, about auto insurance premiums in every Maryland zip code. We found that residents of mostly African American zip codes pay a lot more for auto insurance. For example, residents of zip codes where 70 to 80% of residents are African American, they pay on average about $1,000 more for auto insurance annually. And this discrimination is present in zip codes that are close by or even right next to each other. In certain cases, depending on which side of Cross Country Boulevard in Baltimore that you live on, your premium could jump by over 80%. So this bill will reduce the impact of zip codes on auto insurance by requiring that auto insurers use no more than 5 territories in establishing rates. It's going to spread out risk. It will make insurance rates more accurately reflect the risk differentials, and it will promote racial equality. It's also going to promote transparency by eliminating the section where it says that these ratings need to be trade secrets. Consumers will be able to get a better sense of which insurers are best for them. Policyholders can better determine what consumer protections they need. So we urge a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Schneiderman, Consumer Auto Maryland, here in support of the bill because I do think it would take steps to limit the sort of territorial ratings practices that really have been quite burdensome, particularly for low income and minority communities. And, improve transparency in the auto insurance process by giving people better access to the information insurers are using to set the rates. I mean, I think it's well known that where you live has an impact on how much you pay. But what I think is a little bit shocking is how big that impact is in very small, in places that are very close together. There's a kind of, it's not just that they're using territories, it's that there seems to be a kind of micro targeting by zip codes that, is often costing, lower income and minority drivers hundreds of dollars extra a year based on the neighborhood where they live. Now, of course, income and race are not allowed as risk factors to be used in setting rates, but it certainly looks, when you see distinctions like $700 between, say, Park Heights and Midfield, to neighboring communities in Baltimore, certainly looks like that's being used as a proxy for race. This bill wouldn't prohibit the use of territorial ratings, but it would limit them, requiring them to use no more than 5 across the state, which we think should, limit that kind of micro targeting and thus, ease some of the impact, particularly on lower income and minority drivers. Also, many states now make, the filings about how insurers come up with their ratings and do the ratings are public in many states. This bill would give Maryland the same rules and give people a better chance to understand how these rates are being set, and policymakers a better chance to understand those rules, which frankly right now are kind of a black box to a lot of consumers. So support the bill. Hope you'll give it a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Washington, I share your pain. I've introduced similar pieces of legislation. My wife and I used to live in a central business district, high density downtown Baltimore, a block away from a highway, in a 300-unit apartment building. We moved into a mostly residential area where our nearest neighbor, and it's different from Baltimore City, but our nearest neighbor is yards apart from us, and our insurance doubled instantly. And one would think, living next to a highway, high density area, central Baltimore, that it would be, a lot more expensive than living in a single family home. So I've introduced legislation like this before myself. I wonder, and it looked like this isn't the first time that you've introduced this legislation. So I wonder if you've had the opportunity, because there's a lot more people that's opposing it than that's supporting it today, by the way. But I wonder if you've had an opportunity to talk to the industry about possible remedies to get to where you're trying to get to that might be reflected in this bill or other ideas. Have they had the opportunity to provide you any feedback over the years to introduce this legislation?
Well, thank you for the question. And, I feel sad that your insurance doubled, but it's kind of making the point that we're trying to make here, that the zip codes do matter when it comes to this type of stuff. And I appreciate the fact that you've introduced this before, because it's a major issue. I think the question I would ask the industry is, prove to us that this isn't happening. Prove to us that it's not occurring, that we aren't making this up after study showing that Black communities paying higher premiums than the white communities. Show us why this is happening. I have not seen in any of their testimony resolutions for this at all. Not a resolution, not even the, hey, Senator Washington, let's talk. Or when I was in the House, Delegate Washington, let's talk, after many years of me bringing this up. So I think if they wanted to come to the table, they would have come to the table by now and said, let's make something happen, because we see this as a problem, recognizing it as a problem. There's, again, studies after study has shown across the country that this is happening.
All right. I don't see any other questions for the sponsor of this panel. Thank you very much for your testimony. Going to bring forward the next group of witnesses. Robert Enton, Nancy Egan, Marta Harding, Tina Quigley. Signed up in opposition to the bill.
Robert Enton is testifying in another committee and is unable to be here at this time. He's in JPR testifying. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nancy Egan, and thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in opposition to the bill. I represent the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, which is a nationwide property casualty trade association. We write about 60% of all business in the country and 55.7% of the personal auto market. I will be just talking about the territory section of the bill. As some of you are already aware, I am also a resident of Baltimore City, so I am quite aware that I pay higher rates for my auto insurance than my counterparts. I do remember moving from Baltimore County to Baltimore City and saw a big increase in my rates. So I also am aware that we have more traffic and more parking on the streets. I am also aware that when I'm reading Next Door Neighbor, that there's more thefts, more vandalisms and car hijackings in the city than elsewhere. And these losses are reflected in my rates in my territory. There are more claims, higher payouts, and a combination, of course, will make the rates higher in certain territories than others. In my testimony, if you look on the testimony, it actually goes into what the impact of who will pay higher and who will pay lower. From our estimates, based on our book of business for my members, 54% of the population in policyholders would see a rate increase of about 13% and at an average, and then 46% of the population in Maryland would see a rate decrease on average about 12%. So the question then is, should people in the more rural territories and outer Baltimore County suburbans or Montgomery County suburbans or Howard County end up paying more for their car insurance to supplement the areas where the rates are higher? I won't go anything further. MAPE also provided some information about who would pay less and more. Baltimore City would see their group would pay 3.9% an increase in their premiums, while the rest of their territory would see a reduction. And with that, I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Marta Harding, I'm here on behalf of State Farm, also in opposition to the bill. I'm going to focus on the other part of the bill that deals with that would repeal the trade secret protection for proprietary rating models. These are the complex mathematical and statistical formulas and algorithms that insurers use to match price to risk. It is how companies compete in a highly competitive insurance market. Companies spend millions of dollars to develop these complicated methodologies, and they protect them as trade secrets from each other because it's how we compete with each other, and we don't want our competitors to get access to that information. Maryland, like the vast majority of states, protects this information, recognizes that they are trade secret information and they do not provide for their public disclosure. And to be clear, public disclosure means disclosure to our competitors. There's no way to sort of distinguish from a consumer getting it and a competitor getting it. There's no way to protect it once it is out in the public. To be clear, the MIA, the regulator, has full access to this information in reviewing insurers' rates or for any other purpose. They have access to it. It is just that it is protected from public disclosure under the Public Information Act. The other thing I just want to make sure is clear is the protection is only for the models, the algorithms, the methodologies of blending together the various rating factors that are looked at. The factors themselves, what we look at, whether it be age or territory, which we've talked a lot about today, that's public. The public has full access to that information. Another way to think about it is the law protects the recipe, the way those things are blended together, not the ingredients themselves. And Maryland, like most other states, recognizes that should receive the trade secret protection because of the investment that the companies have made in it, as well as it's how they compete with each other, and we want to preserve a competitive market. So for those reasons, we would ask for an unfavorable report, and I endorse the testimony of Ms. Egan as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Tina Quigley, and I'm Legislative and Regulatory Counsel for Allstate Insurance. And I'm here today in opposition to Senate Bill 816. We oppose the restrictions on territories that were outlined in the bill, and also oppose the repeal of the trade secret protections of rating models. My comments will also be addressing the repeal of the trade secret protections of our rating models. So the rating factors that companies use are publicly available. And I'm sure that you all have seen the Consumer's Guide to Auto Insurance that is published by the Maryland Insurance Administration. And in this guide, it also lists many of the factors that insurers use to develop rates. It's an insurance companies rating models that are proprietary. So the factors are public, the rating models are proprietary. But again, to be clear, as my colleague, Ms. Harding stated, the experts who are charged with ensuring that insurers are in compliance with Maryland law, and that's the Maryland Insurance Commissioner at the Maryland Insurance Administration, gets all of that information. They get the factors, they get the rating models, and they review all of that to ensure that we are in compliance with Maryland law. Our rating models are how we compete in the market. It's how we develop our rates. There's no other type of business in Maryland that is required to make its proprietary business model open for inspection by their competitors. And that should not be the case for insurance companies. A lot of time and money has gone into developing these models, and it's used to help match price to risk and providing competition in the market. Current law is important from a competitive perspective. And at the end of the day, it won't benefit your consumers if you don't have a competitive marketplace. For the reasons stated on the panel before me, and for all the reasons that I've stated, we urge the committee give the bill an unfavorable report.
Thank you very much, Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nancy, the testimony that you gave was that premiums can be impacted by as much as 13%, but that doesn't match up with the fiscal note. But unfortunately, your testimony doesn't give a source like the fiscal note does. What is the source of the information that shows that there could be a potential impact of 13% increase?
Yes, we used our statistical outside contractor using the rates that are filed through our companies. The fiscal note that you're looking at is specific to MAIF insurers. Ours are for the private passengers that we have, that we insure. And we looked at an analysis of the ratings for Maryland, and based on that, they came out with an average premium and then said how they would vary by territory based if you change the rating plan in Maryland, and looked at the average rate and said, you know, these many people would be above the rate, this many policyholders would be below that rate.
Gotcha. And is it the reason why there's such a disparity because MAIF's pool is a higher risk pool than those who have private insurers? Does that have an impact on it at all?
I would not be able to speak to MAIF in particular, but I think we had a similar bill. We had some legislation that was discussed prior to this. And I think they had a larger area of policyholders in Baltimore City and Prince George's County, from what I recall. But I would prefer not to speak for them. I'm not specific. They may be writing more high-risk drivers, and from what I understand, people that did not have insurance before.
Got you. Thank you so very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question for you. I think Ms. Hardin. You said most states protect the proprietary information. So I'm thinking there are some states who have it out there release that's not protected. Which states don't protect? Which states allow this to be in the public sector?
Senator, I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have that information in front of me. I know a few years ago, this committee actually looked at this before you were on the committee, but this issue actually came up because there was some debate about whether the existing law actually protected it in the way that it has always been understood. And so we had to look into that very issue, and sort of Maryland was sort of stuck with the pack of states that protect it. So I have the information from a few years ago. I'll just have to go back in my file and dig it out, and I will get it to you.
Thank
and
you
to the
so much.
committee. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Back to Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for a second bite at the apple, but the senator's question sparked something. There is trade secret information, maybe not for the insurance industry, but other forms of industry that's already shared with state agencies like Maryland Insurance Administration, correct?
Well, this information is
shared with the
It is
Maryland
shared with the
Insurance
insurance.
Administration.
Absolutely.
And so the trade secret information is already available to
To the MIA.
one of our. Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, senators. Any additional comments? I don't see any. I just have one question. I have probably been hearing about this issue since I can't even remember when. I think probably when I moved to Maryland. And I just wonder if there's a conversation that we can have offline that can maybe advance this issue, because it feels like this is a deja vu all over again, even from my days in the House. So I would love to figure out, because I, like many, moved from Suitland to where I live now, and pretty dramatic difference, and I'm still me. So.
Yes, and getting back to Senator Hayes, prior to the COVID, there had been a study that was supposed to be done, or a work group on just looking at low-cost auto and making availability. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it never progressed, and but that was in the House Economics. So there had been some conversation prior to COVID about looking at addressing low-cost auto and those people that can least afford it. So yes, we would welcome to continue any conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll look forward to it. All right, we do have additional witness signed up virtually on the bill, so we'll go to Robert Melvin. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Griffith and members of the committee. My name is Robert Melvin, and I'm with the R Street Institute. We're a nonprofit public policy research organization that promotes free markets. Our organization is opposed to Senate Bill 816, as it will undermine competitive insurance markets in the state. In the 2022 edition of the R Street Institute's annual insurance regulation report card, Maryland's grade was raised from a C- to a C. However, one of the weaknesses that we identified in the state is the lack of underwriting freedom. And we believe that imposing limits on automobile insurance companies' use of territory as a rating factor will only exacerbate the current challenges and subvert the positive movement made in the state's insurance market. Additionally, the requirement that proprietary rate-related information be made public could undermine competition, as each automobile insurance company would be able to view one another's internal algorithms and processes. Vehicle location is one of the most commonly used factors for calculating auto insurance policy. While some may contend that this variable targets certain communities, it's important to point out that it's illegal to use race as a factor for underwriting. Studies have concluded also that auto insurance affordability problems in urban areas with large minority populations reflect higher costs of providing coverage, not unfair discrimination. In fact, the reason the rates tend to be higher in more urban communities relate to greater propensity for accidents, traffic density, increased incident of theft, vandalism, more hazardous driving conditions, proclivity to litigate, and higher costs of auto repair. Rating variables such as the use of territories are critical for accurate insurance pricing, and placing limits on their use could result in lower risk policyholders subsidizing higher risk policyholders. Impeding underwriting freedom manipulates market-related signals that help assess risk and results in increased premiums for all insured drivers, which culminates in higher risk drivers having a reduced ability to obtain insurance. For these reasons, we urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. I see no questions from the committee, so we're going to move to our next witness, Matt Overturf. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matt Overturf on behalf of the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, requesting an unfavorable report on Senate Bill 816. I will echo the comments of my colleagues with respect to the bill and will quickly summarize my written remarks. When it comes to territory, in order to accurately price premiums, insurers must determine to the best degree possible an individual's risk. Geography is an important consideration in insurance pricing. The more people there are, the more cars there are, and the more cars there are comes a greater chance of accidents and increased risk. With respect to trade secrets, insurers compete for policyholders with the coverage and pricing options they can offer. Insurers hold their position in the market by using their own rating models, formulas, and analysis that are currently protected as proprietary information under the watchful eye of the Maryland Insurance Administration. Removing this protection would likely minimize competition by allowing insurance competitors to see and use proprietary rate information, which could ultimately lead to the use of generic rating models that are less precise, thus increasing cost. Given the upward pressure on the auto premium, Senate Bill 816 would likely create. NAMIC opposes the legislation and respectfully requests an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I see no questions from the committee, so you are our final witness on that bill, and that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 816. Have a good afternoon. Colleagues, we're now going to turn to Senate Bill 832. Senator Carrozza, Public Health Pregnancy Coercion. Good afternoon. If you have a panel, please
thank you,
feel
Madam
free to bring
Chair.
them up.
Yes, if my panel could come up, Danielle, Deborah, Shahana, and Dr. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Klausmeyer, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Mary Beth Carrozza. I'm representing Worcester, Wycomico, and Somerset counties, and I'm presenting Senate Bill 832. And this is a bill, the Coercive Abuse Against Mothers Prevention Act. And Madam Chair and members, I know this is a difficult issue for many of us. And so I took my mom's advice and took a breath and she said, you should speak from the heart. And I wanted to first, before presenting the specifics of the bill, just give a little context of why I think the bill is important now and maybe what policies it may lead to. I think my colleagues would agree that over the past year, Maryland has dramatically expanded access to abortion. The Abortion Care Access Act of 2022 expanded the number of healthcare providers who can perform abortions to include non-physicians, and it established a special fund to enable greater access to abortion services. This session, the Senate already has passed legislation requiring public institutions of higher education to provide reproductive health care plans and services. And this Maryland General Assembly has made it a top priority to enshrine the right to an abortion in the Maryland Constitution. These combined legislative actions, which have been prioritized by this Maryland General Assembly, not only significantly increases access to abortion for Maryland women, but I also wanted to point out it has attracted other women from other states to seek Maryland out as an abortion destination. And these are just facts. The passage of SB 798, the right to reproductive freedom, does virtually eliminate any possibility of abortion safeguards, which I think is what makes this legislation today take on a new sense of urgency. As the state of Maryland expands access for women to exercise their right to have an abortion, I believe, and I hope my colleagues will agree, that we have an obligation to protect a woman's right to protect her pregnancy and prevent abortion coercion. And I want to be clear, SB 832 does not restrict a woman from having an abortion or using reproductive services. This legislation is intended to ensure that women are provided a true choice when it comes to pregnancy. The bill states that an individual who knows or suspects that a woman is pregnant may not engage in certain specific conduct with the intent of directing the pregnant woman to have an abortion. And this includes attempting to commit, or threatening to commit physical harm to the pregnant woman, revoking a scholarship award to a pregnant woman by an institution of higher education discharging the pregnant woman from employment or changing her compensation, and denying any social assistance, housing, or financial support as a pregnant woman. And I believe that the members of the committee would agree that these are protections for all pregnant women. The legislation also includes important protections against human trafficking of pregnant women, including prohibiting the selling, attempting to sell, or threatening to sell the pregnant woman into sex trafficking, and to sell or threaten to sell the unborn baby of the pregnant women into sex trafficking once the baby is born. The legislation also prevents an individual from attempting to force, or threatening to force the pregnant woman to continue to engage in sex trafficking. Again, I think these are all areas we can agree that are needed for the protection of pregnant women. SB 832 would establish a misdemeanor penalty for coercing a pregnant woman to have an abortion, where violators would be subject to a maximum fine of $1,000. And speaking from my heart and speaking with other women, when a woman discovers that she's pregnant under not ideal circumstances, she finds herself at a crossroads of choices. And the trajectory of her life takes on a different set of choices. And there are subtle forms of pressure that can go unnoticed until the only option for some women may be to seek the abortion. And in other cases, as you'll hear from some witnesses, the coercion is far more blatant, discriminatory, and sometimes involving physical violence. Studies have found that many women who seek counseling services after having an abortion were pressured into terminating their pregnancies by their husbands, boyfriends, or family members. After having an abortion, some women report symptoms of depression, guilt, shame, regret, self-hatred, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of even being unworthy of love, low self-esteem, and anxiety. And again, some of the studies show that there's an increase in drug or alcohol addiction and attempts of suicide. Again, all I'm trying to present here is that we should recognize that with the expansion of abortion, there will be some women that will experience what was just described. We should recognize that the same for the pregnant women, that many are not receiving adequate support from the people who matter most in their lives when it comes to when they are pregnant. And I'm not saying all women, but there are some women, they're taught from a young age to put others before themselves, often completely forgetting their own needs. And in a situation of extremes, like choosing to continue or terminate a pregnancy, women can often feel pressured to make a decision that may not align with their own heart, with their own internal wants and desires. And I submit to you that this pressure is even more terrifying in situations of domestic violence or human trafficking. It is estimated that 24.9 million men, women, and children worldwide are subjected to the abuses of human trafficking. It happens in plain sight, and many victims are coerced by their trafficker into participating into their own abuse. I think many of you have heard victims and traffickers alike have told law enforcement that Maryland is a gold mine for human trafficking due to our central location, our numerous rest stops, truck stops, bus stations, and the 195 corridor is a main gateway to major cities along the eastern seaboard. I also want to point out that there was a study done back in 2014, but it looked at the many facets of human trafficking, including the correlation between human trafficking and abortion. Of the women who survived human trafficking that participated in the study, 55% had at least one abortion, 30% had multiple abortions, and 55% had forced miscarriages. Abortions like these are taking place right here in Maryland. And healthcare providers need to be educated and empowered to act should a victim of human trafficking enter their office to obtain such services. This legislation would allow healthcare providers, should they suspect their patient is a victim of coercion, to wait 24 hours before performing the procedure. Although I want to point out the healthcare provider is empowered to waive that waiting period. An employee or volunteer of a healthcare facility who knows, alleges, or suspects that a woman is being coerced into having an abortion must notify local law enforcement within 48 hours. Ideally, this would allow investigations to take place, perpetrators to be arrested, and human trafficking victims to be freed and to begin the healing process. Madam Chair, I want to repeat that the bill is not intended to prevent abortion. The bill is intended to prevent women from being further victimized by a system that does not value them. This bill empowers women to seek action and to prevent the perpetrator from continuing to coerce other women into having abortions. I have thought through this legislation. I held back initially proposing it because I wanted the aspects of human trafficking to be added to this. I believe that this is common sense legislation that protects all women who are pregnant, especially at a time when abortion has become so readily available in the state of Maryland. I have a lot of respect for the members of this committee, and this legislation is in your hands. I hope that this hearing will help some women who are pregnant or may be pregnant in the future, that they are protected when they are pregnant, that maybe this will lead to policies that better protect our pregnant women. Because I believe, Madam Chair and members of this committee, that we do have a shared goal of protecting all pregnant women. So I do ask for your kind attention and consideration, and I request that this committee grant a favorable report to SB 832. And if it's okay, I'd like to hear from our witnesses before any questions, if that's okay. Thank you.
I'm Dr. James Kelly. Good afternoon. I'm a physician and a psychiatrist. I have 35 years experience of treating women who've had abortions. The majority of the women that I've treated who have had abortions have told me that they felt coerced. Coercion comes in many forms. It could be subtle, it could be overt. Often it's the threat of a loss of a relationship, abandonment, being taken out of school, kicked out of their homes. Often the threats can come from the baby's father or their own family. Sometimes there are physical threats, sometimes they're violent physical assaults. Patients often describe to me and are diagnosed with disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety. Often they have suicide attempts. Many have committed crimes to deal with issues of substance abuse. Many develop self-injurious behaviors, banging, cutting, burning themselves, abusing themselves after the coerced abortion. This bill has a very, very narrow application. This bill is only about coercion. It doesn't affect any of the other abortion laws or issues. It's focused only on coercion. I'm speaking on behalf of the Nationwide Association of the American Physicians and Surgeons, and we hope that this committee will have a favorable review. We think that anyone who's truly interested in women, truly wants to protect them, truly believes in freedom of choice, and is against the abuse of coercion will be for this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Danielle Pimentel, and I serve as Policy Counsel at Americans United for Life. And I want to thank you for the opportunity today to provide testimony in support of SB 832, which is based in part on one of our model bills. This bill specifically prohibits an individual from engaging in conduct that would be coercive against a pregnant woman who refuses that individual's demand that she seeks an abortion. And these safeguards are needed in Maryland because many women seek an abortion due to intimate partner violence or reproductive control from an intimate partner, a family member, a sex trafficker, or their employer. Studies across the board show that a large percentage of women have been coerced to have an abortion. For example, one study found that 73.8% of women said that they disagreed that their decision to have an abortion was entirely free from even subtle pressures from others to abort. Victims of sex trafficking are among the women that face reproductive control. And this bill is responding to the rising need for legal protections for such women, and does so by requiring that abortion providers ask direct questions that can help them identify victims of sex trafficking, as well as requiring signs to be posted in waiting rooms, consultation rooms, procedure rooms, so that women and whoever accompanies them to a facility, which may be a sex trafficker, knows that sex trafficking is illegal, as well as coercion. These signs would also provide women with the information that they need to discreetly tell the provider that they are being sex trafficked. These are necessary safeguards given the prevalence of sex trafficking in Maryland. Between June 2013 and April 2020, there have been 671 reports of suspected sex trafficking in Maryland, with most of the victims being between the ages of 14 and 17. Even Maryland's Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services states on its website that Maryland is an attractive destination for traffickers. Ultimately, many women choose abortion or come to an abortion clinic not of their own free choice, but are there because they are being forced or pressured. And I'll end with this. I urge your support of this bill, which will not only protect against coerced abortions, but it will also increase the number of women and young girls that are rescued from sex trafficking. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Committee. Deborah Bricado on behalf of Campaign to Protect Women, and we are strongly in favor of Senate Bill 832. I'm a mother of 4 daughters and a retired nurse. This assembly has passed multiple pieces of legislation that lower the medical standards for women and girls of Maryland. Removal of the physician requirement, expansion of scope of practice, and telehealth, to name a few. Watching this promotion of the abortion industry, I think about my daughters and many other girls, high school and college girls, who do not need parental consent to undergo surgical or chemical abortion. The abortion industry has turned pregnancy and motherhood into something to be dreaded instead of the cherished gift that it is. How many of these girls will feel pressured by boyfriends, teachers, college professors to make their pregnancy go away? How many will suffer injury or death because their parents are unaware their daughter is post-abortive with infection or hemorrhage, but think it's the flu or she is simply run down? There are 2 all-trimester abortion centers in Maryland, and one is in College Park, the home of our flagship university. I think of the young women from the pregnancy center who had experienced abortion. They would say, "I can't kill another baby," and reveal how it was their boyfriend or family members insisting they must get an abortion. No one offered support. They felt backed into a corner. I think of the 15-year-old girl at the Planned Parenthood on Howard Street in Baltimore City. A group approached a 15-year-old girl, her aunt, her grandmother, and her uncle. Tears were streaming down her face. I provided information about crisis pregnancy centers. The women stood in front of the girl and said the boyfriend wouldn't help. She was too young and she must get the abortion. The women made the decision, not the girl. She continued to cry. They all went in, and an hour later they left without seeing them exit, or I left without seeing them exit. In many of these cases, it's clear these young girls are pointed in only one direction. They are prevented from seeking alternate solutions. They're coerced into a permanent action for a temporary condition, which can cause physical, emotional, and psychological injury. The girls go into the abortion center and receive the abortion during the visit. They're making a decision about something that cannot be returned. I would say to the young ladies at the pregnancy center, when you find out you're pregnant, you're not having a baby the next day. You have 6 or 7 months to plan for the baby, and we will help you. When framed that way, having a baby didn't seem so scary anymore. We know there is opposition to this bill, but the Campaign to Protect Women urges the 2 sides to work together to respect and protect a woman's right to motherhood. So we strongly recommend that you give a favorable report on Senate Bill 832.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. My name is Shohana Faith, and I am the Capital Area Regional Coordinator for Students for Life Action. We support this bill and the efforts to protect Maryland women from being pressured into unwanted abortions. In my personal experience as a sexual assault survivor, I have noticed that men who force themselves on women will stoop to coercion and violence to force a woman to abort when their actions result in pregnancy. While my traumatic experience did not result in pregnancy, I know that if it had, my high school boyfriend, who was several years older than me, would have likely coerced me to cooperate with his wishes to cover it up. We have a responsibility to protect women in Maryland from such coercion. And if you think that abortion coercion is an unfortunate but rare occurrence, think again. According to a Charlotte Lozier Institute study released in January of this year, 61% of women who obtained abortions reported pressure from male partners, family members, other persons, financial concerns, and other circumstances. They found that perceived pressure to abort was significantly associated with more negative emotions, disruption of their daily life, work, and relationships, thoughts, dreams, and flashbacks to the abortion, grief and sadness, and a decline in overall mental health. According to another study by the Beasley Institute, 66 human trafficking survivors were interviewed, and it was discovered that they had a total of 114 abortions among the 66 of them. A majority of these survivors said that coercion played a major role in at least one of their abortions. Research such as this is why multiple states have already passed or are considering anti-coercion abortion laws. This legislation is a necessary step to ensuring women's safety from coercion by partners, family members, and other abusers. In a nation that is torn by political debate over abortion, our state should be able to find common ground on this issue. This is a vital step for women's freedom. Please give a favorable report on SB 832.
Good afternoon. My name is Eileen Roberts, and I'm the founder and president of Parents for Life. Since 1987, Parents for Life has been serving as a collective voice for parents, educating the public and state legislators of the need for public policy that protects daughters. Most importantly, however, I am the mother of a daughter who became severely depressed. Believing her boyfriend had introduced her to drugs, her father and I searched for answers, but instead of finding drugs, we discovered a follow-up questionnaire from the abortion clinic she never sent back to the abortion clinic. Her boyfriend and an adult friend intruded on our parental rights and drove my daughter to the abortion clinic. While in the hospital for follow-up care for depression, it was discovered that her legal abortion was done incomplete and she required follow-up surgery to repair the damage done by the abortionist, but she could not have that follow-up surgery unless I signed a consent form. To add insult to injury, my husband and I were responsible for the follow-up care and cost in the amount of $27,000. No one knows our children better than parents. Had my daughter been told, wait a minute, go home to your parents and let your mom put her arms around you and say, I love you, we can work this through together, I know this tragedy would have never happened. If my daughter was sent home to me, I know without a doubt, my daughter's complications would have never happened. Coercing my daughter, not telling her parents by a clinical worker who did not know my daughter was ultimately, intimately as I did, should have never happened. Please allow parents to put their arms around their daughters and say, I love you, we can work this through together, which SB 832 would allow and would also restore family dignity. I am not naive to know about the teens and women who are abused, but we give these women secret abortions and we send them home to the abuser. So I am here to ask this committee to favorably pass the bill because Maryland parents deserve better.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Hershey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just looking through the opposition and there's really only, like say, 3 pieces of opposition. Two say the same things, that they feel that the best way to handle this is to strengthen our criminal laws and increase prosecution, which is something that we have been saying with a lot of different crimes in the state of Maryland, but we're not getting the General Assembly to go anywhere near that. So I will go to the one piece of opposition that's a little bit different. And this is from the University of Baltimore's Human Trafficking Prevention Project. And ma'am, I think at the end, if I have to address it to somebody, because you spoke about this, this Human Trafficking Prevention Project strongly believes that access to legal abortion is foundational to ending sex trafficking. Does that make any sense to you? Or I can't square up how that makes any sense.
To me, that does not make any sense.
This is the I just said, University of Maryland testimony of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project that believes abortion is essential to ending sex trafficking.
Unfortunately, we know of many instances where abortion clinics may be aware of victims being sex trafficked and do not actually report those instances. So essentially covering up for those traffickers. In a lot of cases too, when women are going to abortion clinics, abortion providers are in a unique situation to possibly be the last chance or of hope for them to get out of sex trafficking or out of a domestic abuse situation. So this bill would ensure that those abortion providers take the steps necessary to ask the questions that can identify these victims, and also ensures that they have some kind of exit strategy or other help and resources to actually get them out of the situation that they're in. So providing abortions only covers up, unfortunately, the sex trafficking, but allowing or having laws that would ensure that abortion providers are taking the steps to, act on their suspicions that these women are being trafficked, and ensure that they're being provided the help that they need and resources that they need, either from local enforcement or local social assistance, things like that would actually help decrease the rate of sex traffickers or sex trafficking, and also help those sex traffickers being brought to justice.
That seems to make a lot more sense to me as well, too. I appreciate your response. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Mounts, then Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Chair. Senator Carosa, I picked some other information up in the unfavorable testimony. And it was opposing the bill based off of autonomy, a woman's autonomy. How would you respond to that? The bill would infringe on autonomy. And Dr. Kelly, can you talk a little bit about how you can identify coercion and how that's clear, and when there is coercion, when it's clear there is not coercion?
Thank you for the question, Senator Mounts. I think that what we can all start with a fundamental in an agreement in the protection of pregnant women. And so some of what you see that this bill does, it kind of spells out where those protections should be, everything from the physical violence to, scholarships to housing and other assistance to make sure those protections are in place. Part of it also, and I'm thinking this through, is just informational, that women who are pregnant are not only presented with one option, and if there's information that they understand that coercion is prohibited, I'm not even sure some of these women, unless you state it that clearly, know that what they're experiencing is not acceptable. So maybe just to spell out this behavior, coercion, is prohibited. I think that in itself is a protection for pregnant women.
I think a good way to look at this is a form of abuse. We already have laws in the state of Maryland that require healthcare providers to help people who they think have been abused, particularly children or minors. And this is a form of abuse. This is not about abortion access. This is about the coercion and the abuse that may lead up to a choice that is not freely made by the girl or the woman. I'm the psychiatrist for jails on the Eastern Shore. I see many people who are in sex trafficking, prostitution, drug abuse, and often I hear a very similar story. that they were railroaded into a decision out of physical violence or coercion of some kind, if we can at least say to healthcare providers, if you suspect someone who is being coerced, abused, or in the bondage of human slavery, that you now have a proactive obligation to assist these people, then we might be able to rescue these women out of this type of enslavement. This is the modern form of slavery. That's all we want to do, is to let the people who are in this type of bondage know that there is someone out there for them, and that this panel and the legislature actually want to support these people to be free. If they want to make a choice when they are no longer being threatened or under in a coercive environment, that's fine. This just deals with that incident where they are coerced. And then once they go through this process, it is a lifelong problem that we see. Drug abuse, crimes, post-traumatic stress disorder. We just want to focus on that one issue of this type of abuse. We protect other entities, other people from abuse that we're aware of by requiring healthcare providers to provide assistance, to provide information, or to protect people such as from other sexual abuse. And this is a form of sexual abuse.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Crows. Thank you for this bill, and for all of you for being here. I was coming in from another bill hearing, but it kind of was halfway through the group. So I don't know if you talked about this, but Senator Crows, the information about an individual who knows or suspects that a woman is pregnant sounds familiar to me, because I remember we worked on this issue with Lauren Reed's law, trying to provide some additional protections for pregnant women at the time. And I was curious if I've noticed that there's a whole, and I actually, somebody sent me a message about this earlier. There's a whole package of bills that's being considered downstairs with the victims of human trafficking. There's an issue with persons in a position of authority victimizing a minor sexually. There's a whole package of bills dealing with human trafficking. And so on the timing on this, the coercion angle of human trafficking can't be ignored, obviously. So could you just elaborate on how using this statute can help, could that be something that we could work into those other bills as well, even if, as it's kind of a part of a whole package of bills?
So thank you for the question, Senator Reedy. And before you came in, and when I, presented the bill to the committee, part of the timing, and I believe the sense of urgency with coercion, is because we have expanded abortion in Maryland. It's just a fact, between what we passed last year with the expansion of non-physicians performing abortions, with what we're doing this session with enshrining the right to abortion in the Maryland Constitution, and with the bill we just had with reproductive health plans required by institutions of public education. I say all that as way of background because to me, then, as you've been expanding access, I believe it puts more pressure on us, and us, I say together as policymakers, whatever the committee, to put in protections for pregnant women. And whether those, and I understand your question, that some of these protections cross different categories, everything from, the fact that we require people to report child abuse, but yet we don't have this requirement if a provider or an employee of a clinic suspects this. At this point, that to me, again, I always look for areas where we can agree. And some of these looks to me like are some basic protections. If some of this has to be coordinated between this committee and, JPR, that's great. I really, as I said, I have full confidence that you all will look at this and maybe see what pieces that we can take and better protect women who are pregnant across the board, all pregnant women, whatever they decide to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions for the sponsor of this committee. Thank you very much for your testimony. We have additional witnesses signed up on the bill. So I will now call Francis Arlingas, Paige Burns, Shirley Reddick. They're signed up in support of the bill. Good afternoon. You can get started as soon as you're settled.
Me too. Okay. Thank you. I can't be as eloquent as the sponsor of the bill was and as comprehensive, but I'm Dr. Frank Arlinghouse. I come before you as the father of 3 daughters, and married to a woman who was a survivor of abortion coercion. I have to thank my mother-in-law every day for that, and you have no idea how painful that is. I asked the members of the committee to return a favorable report on this. Abortion is legal in Maryland, and this bill does not try to change that. What it does do is provide women, especially minors, protection from being coerced. The state needs to protect women, and they have a compelling interest to protect women from coercion. It's consistent with the limitations and restrictions of the abortion amendment potentially coming to referendum in 2024. This bill provides solid and comprehensive protections from coercion. It gives the victim explicit rights, and it provides additional protections to minors. I've spoken before the legislature before about my concerns with regard to abortion trafficking, especially as Maryland becomes an abortion destination. This bill is not about stopping abortion. It's about providing women that protection from coercion. Among the women who've had abortion, too often we hear stories of coercion, often by spouses or boyfriends or even parents. The women feel as if they had no choice, no help, and no opportunity to make their own decision. These women deserve a system that does not consistently fail them. But I really want to talk to you about the results of not addressing coercion and the things that happen. Senator Reedy and Senator Lamb are definitely familiar with the case of Laura Wallen. I won't address that. I'm sure Senator Reedy would be would be willing to share that story with you. But I am sharing the story on behalf of my daughter, Teresa, of her friend Kaylee, who along with her child were victims of violence. This is contained in my written testimony, but fundamentally, the idea is this. Kaylee was beaten by her boyfriend in an attempt to end the pregnancy. And then he actually strangled her. Had he not succeeded in killing her, there would have been only a charge of assault and nothing for the death of her child who was killed before viability. You can read this story in my written testimony. I ask that you return a favorable report on this bill to protect women like Kaylee.
My name is Paige Burns. I've been personally devastated by abortion. At the age of 15, I became pregnant and was coerced by family members to get an abortion. Pregnant again at the age of 19, the same people explained to me that abortion was my only practical option. No alternatives were explored, no hope given for the future, no discussion of the ramifications, which are, by the way, extreme and horrible. The decisions made are forever etched into my mind and heart, occurring because of selfishness and bad counsel. The children I would never know, the lasting effects on my living children, the physical health concerns, the never-ending pain and suffering that resides in me as a result, knowing that my children, my own flesh and blood, were callously destroyed. The realization that the removal of children from my womb did not make me unpregnant, but instead made me the parent of deceased children. And that's just a fact. Pregnancy centers, which I knew nothing of at the time, provide free and confidential resources and supplies. They provide counseling and complete information to anyone who is pregnant regarding the choices available to them and the repercussions of each of those choices. Abortion providers do charge for their services. I don't understand why the state government is so reluctant to provide even the smallest protections for women and children, instead focusing on funding abortion providers who push one option only and who were complicit in leaving me in the dark and perpetrating irreversible harm on me and my family. Women need real choices, not to be pressured into what they believe will be an easy way out, only to find out that their decision will lead to devastation and pain beyond their imagination. Abortion kills children and hurts women. And when all the facts are presented to someone, this empowers them to make an informed, healthy decision for themselves and their families. There's no easy answer for women who find themselves in difficult situations like these, but understanding available solutions is the key. If your desire is to protect women and children, I implore you to pass this bill. It is a start and the very least that you can do. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Shirley Ruddick from Columbia, Maryland. I am testifying in favor of SB 832. As a pediatrician, medical educator, and a mother, I see this bill as clear testament to the public health and safety promoting efforts of the Maryland Assembly. This act recognizes that reproductive autonomy means first and foremost freedom from coercion and violence. Consider an adolescent girl homeless by family circumstances or initially lured away by social or sexual attention or the promise of things she doesn't have. Perhaps she's your daughter's classmate, or a young immigrant stranded in an unfamiliar country. She becomes trapped in a sex trade with a repeated cycle of emotional and physical abuse and chemical dependency. Then she becomes pregnant. Her life only has meaning to her handlers if she remains productive in the trade. So she is taken to an abortion center. She is expected to have an abortion and accept a contraceptive implant. Both require physical instrumentation. In this case, yet another violation of her body. Presenting this setting, perhaps knowing there is a life within her, she sees purpose in protecting that life. If properly counseled, offered help, and protected, she musters the courage to reveal coercion and accept help when she has not felt capable or deserving of that before. This act gives powerful attention to our most vulnerable girls and young women. This act gives immediate protection from those who threaten or hold them in human bondage, but also frees others from economic handcuffs, such as limitation or withholding of employment or scholarship based on their reproductive decisions. Moreover, this bill holds providers and legal abortion facilities to the same standards of reporting and accountability as other state-mandated reporters when encountering clear or suspected child abuse, sexual assault, or admitted domestic abuse. In closing, this act will save lives, perhaps 2 for 1, that will have opportunity to be welcomed back to families and or caring support systems. Without the requirements and protections this act offers, abortion facilities knowingly or unknowingly become complicit in the human and sex trafficking trade. I ask you to please vote favorable of this bill.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions from the committee for this panel, so we thank you for your testimony. We do have virtual witnesses signed up on this bill. So we will now turn to Kelly Lester. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Lester. I am the Director of Outreach for And Then There Were None. We are a ministry to former abortion workers, and we have nearly 650 workers who've left the industry. So I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a former worker and also of them. And I can tell you that over 30% of our workers admit that while they were in the industry, there were women that were being coerced into having an abortion. Many of them were being sex trafficked. Many of them were in situations at home that were dangerous, where they were being violated by a parent or a family member. And so this bill would help protect those women. And if these, as workers, if we had had some or some kind of effect to our not reporting, then many of us would have been more likely to report. Also, as a woman who had my first abortion at 15, I can tell you that the entire abortion industry is up to course. everything from the initial phone call through the entire process. We were told and led to tell women that abortion is their answer. And so this bill will not only protect women from outside people coercing them, but it will also protect women from the abortion industry itself coercing them. This bill does not, as the earlier gentleman said, it does not end abortion. It does not stop abortion. What it does is it truly allows women to have the choice. Everybody says, my body, my choice. Coercion is not a choice. I did not have a choice. I was coerced and told that this was my only option. This was my only choice. If I wanted to continue and go to college, if I wanted to continue and play in sports, that I had to have this abortion. And had a bill like this been in effect, it may have prevented me from having that first abortion and later turning to drugs and alcohol, domestic violence, and many other things. So I too am in support of this bill and ask that you would help protect the women of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. There are no questions from the committee, so we're going to move to our next witness. Have a good afternoon. We're going to call Catherine Adelaide. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Catherine Adelaide, and I am a member of Feminists for Life who believe that women deserve better than abortion as the only alternative to an unplanned, unwanted pregnancy. I also am a survivor of domestic violence and a survivor of pressure to abort. I'm a community volunteer who educates different clubs and groups about human trafficking and domestic violence and their often symbiotic relationship with the abortion industry to control women, force abortion, and take away real choice. SB 832 is or should be a common sense, nonpartisan bill. I work with a broad spectrum of people, including Democrats, Republicans, libertarians, atheists, Christians, Jews, and LGBTQ, who are very much concerned that choice is being replaced by coercion, both legislatively and socially. I especially appreciate the emancipation and support of a pregnant minor. My daughter, the one who survived the pressure of being aborted, who is a Democrat for life, was the executive director of a crisis pregnancy center, reported that it was mostly pregnant minors who most wanted to keep their babies, but were being forced by family members to have an abortion and felt they had no recourse. SB 832 would give them real choice and resources to support that choice. Requiring a healthcare facility that also performs abortion to post signs, including an alternative exit from the facility, helps protect victims of domestic violence and human trafficking from forced abortion and actually helps them to escape these dangerous situations. I've heard reports of abusers who circle the abortion clinic to ensure a completion of a forced abortion. These precautions should not be voluntary, but prescribed by law. Real choice requires permission to also say no to abortion without fear of coercion, threat, or force. Please give SB 832 a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and no questions from the committee. So thank you for participating in the hearing. We're going to move to our next witness, who is Martha Shopping.
Thank you. My name is Martha Shuping, and I am a medical doctor specializing in psychiatry. And I also have had a year of research training at Harvard Medical School. I teach continuing education classes to professionals concerning the very topics that are addressed in Senate Bill 832. Research shows that the majority of women who have been trafficked have had multiple forced abortions. One of the women involved in this research answered questions about her circumstances, and she reported 17 abortions while she was trafficked. The American Psychological Association had a task force on human trafficking and expressed concern regarding the psychological risks of forced abortion of trafficked women and girls. A textbook of the National Abortion Federation says that when women are coerced to have an abortion, they are at increased risk for adverse psychological effects after an abortion. In a document concerning intimate partner violence published by the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, they said that 324,000 pregnant women in the US are abused every year. And intimate partner violence occurs at about 3 times the rate 3 times as often in the population of women who are seeking abortion. And with that in mind, the American College of OBGYN has recommended some of the similar provisions that this bill would address, that it is important to screen women for reproductive coercion. In my 35 years of practice of psychiatry, I've treated many women who have experienced psychological distress after coerced abortions. It's a very common problem. One woman who sought my help, who is currently a Maryland resident, was 17 years old when she had a forced abortion. Her boyfriend, oh, thank you. I urged passage of this bill, Senate Bill 832. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. There are no questions from the committee, so you are the last witness on the bill. We thank you for your testimony, and that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 832. Colleagues will now turn to Senate Bill 805, Maryland Medical Assistance Program and Health Insurance Required Coverage for Biomarker Testing. Good afternoon, Senator Ellis, and if you have a panel, you should feel free to bring them forward.
Senator, they're coming. Okay. We might as well get started. So it's just fine. Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Griffith, Vice Chair Klossmeyer, and members of the Finance Committee. I'm Senator Arthur Ellis here to present Senate Bill 805, Maryland Medical Assistance Program and Health Insurance Required Coverage for Biomarker Testing. The purpose of this bill is to require the Maryland Medical Assistance Program and certain insurers, nonprofit health service plans, health maintenance organizations, and managed care organizations to provide coverage for biomarker testing that is supported by medical and scientific evidence, and to establish requirements for deductibles, co-payments, co-insurance, and utilization review for biomarker testing. I want to talk about biomarker testing. I didn't know too much about it before a few months ago. So biomarkers mean a characteristic that is objectively measured and evaluated as an indicator of normal biological processes, pathogenic processes, or pharmacological responses to a specific therapeutic intervention, including known gene-drug interactions for medications being considered for use or already being administered, includes gene mutations, characteristics of genes, or protein expressions. Biomarker testing is the analysis of a patient's tissue, blood, or other biospecimen for the presence of a biomarker. I'll say it again. Biomarker testing is the analysis of a patient's tissue, blood, or other biospecimen for the presence of a biomarker. Coverage of biomarker testing must include cleared or approved by the U.S. Drug Administration, required recommendation for an FDA-approved drug to ensure the insured or enrollee is a good candidate for the drug treatment. Coverage must be provided in a manner that limits disruptions in care, including the need for multiple biopsies or biospecimen samples. Senate Bill 805 requires the Maryland Medical Assistance Program and private insurance carriers to provide coverage for biomarker testing that is supported by medical and scientific evidence. It also establishes utilization review for biomarker testing to create a standard for accessing this technology that improves treatment outcomes, saves money, and lives. SB 805 is an important piece of legislation that is critical for ensuring that detection of cancers and other diseases can be found more expeditiously, particularly in Black women and men. Despite evidence demonstrating the effectiveness of biomarker testing and targeted therapy, not all individuals currently benefit equitably from these advances. There are notable racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities in access and utilization of these advancements in care. These disparities in access and use of medically necessary biomarker testing and targeted therapy can potentially widen existing disparities in patient survival. The National Black Caucus of State Legislators adopted resolutions recognizing the importance of biomarker testing in advancing health equity and reducing disparity. All that being said, your access to care or access to care should not depend on wealth or ethnic status. I'm also so pleased to tell you that the advocates and the carriers, insurance carriers, have agreed to a few amendments, which I've reviewed, that would make this bill technically sufficient and meaningful to the people of Maryland. Madam Chair, I want to let you know that we did the hard work before the hearing to come before you with the amendments we've all agreed to and have requested. The amendments we agreed to with the carriers do three things, and we'll testify to this. One, add a definition and makes clarifying amendments regarding the allowed purpose of biomarker testing. The second eliminates one of the 6 criteria listed in the bill regarding the test to be covered. And the third eliminates the creation of a separate prior authorization standard. In addition to those compromise amendments, we worked with the Maryland Legislative Black Caucus, and they requested 2 additional amendments in support of this bill. One, directs the Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities to convene a work group to develop an outreach plan to educate communities negatively impacted by health disparities, to educate them about biomarkers and biomarker testing. Also, the second amendment that recommended by the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland directs the Maryland Health Care Commission to report on the impact of providing access to biomarker testing to individuals based on race, gender, age, and public or private insurance. I also want to thank the Maryland Healthcare Commission for working collaboratively with us, the Black Caucus, and our other stakeholders. In terms of the state fiscal effect, the Maryland Department of Health advises that is in the process of implementing Medicaid coverage of biomarker testing for cancer patients. Under this bill, Medicaid, subject to the limitations of the state budget, and as permitted by federal law, must provide coverage for biomarker testing for all diseases and conditions if the use of testing is supported by medical and scientific evidence. So that was the initial intent of the bill. The health department came back and said, oh, that'd be way too expensive to cover all tests and all diseases. So we're working with the House and the sponsors to possibly limit the coverage to cancers, all cancers, for Medicaid only, because the private carriers, nonprofits, are agreed to use their standards to do biomarker testing for individuals under this bill. So we're working on those amendments to bring the cost in line to what is currently being approved by Maryland Healthcare Commission. The Department of Legislative Services notes that the coverage of biomarker testing is likely to be offset by cost savings or cost avoidance, as the tests are intended to diagnose, treat, and manage diseases and conditions. The tests also facilitate the use of more effective and targeted healthcare treatments and help avoid the use of therapies that may be unsafe or ineffective for specific patients. With that being said, thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 805, biomarker testing requirements, and I ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 805.
Madam Chair, Senators, thank you for the opportunity to come tell my story today and ask for your support of Senate Bill 805 to expand patient access to biomarker testing in Maryland. I tell you without exaggeration that my access may be the reason I'm here to testify before you today. At the start of 2020, I was 50, 20 years a business owner, over 25 wedding anniversaries, and mom to 3 school-age kids. Despite the pandemic sense of surreal, we never would have imagined that by the end of the year, I would find myself in the hands of a very talented surgeon at Hopkins who used robotic Da Vinci tools to remove the entire upper left lobe of my lung. I was asymptomatic, and this was an incidental find. I had no known risk factors, but I had stage 3A lung cancer. I am not alone. Every year, lung cancer kills as many people as the next 3 deadliest cancers combined. That's 5 on the world stage, and up to 25% are in non-smokers like me. I'm improving the survival odds because biomarker testing revealed an EGFR positive genetic mutation, one with effective targeted treatment. We don't know the cause, but we know that epidermal growth factor receptors get stuck in the on position. Cells grow out of control. The treatment, precision medicine, plugs in and shuts them down. Even after diagnosis, biomarker testing reveals common mutation pathways that these sneaky cancers use to evade treatment. And that results in next generation treatments. The one I use is on its 3rd. So medicine is literally working one step ahead of the disease, and insurance coverage must keep pace. Now, more than 2 years cancer-free, I ask you to give the same chance to every constituent whose Maryland family member is struck by cancer. Pass legislation to grant them equal access to life-saving biomarker testing. Swift access, because cancer cells do not stop spreading while we all wait for insurance pre-authorizations. Your action on this issue matters, and thank you. Erin Zaniker. Thank you.
Madam Chair and Senators, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important topic. My name is Dr. Ronnie Mara, and I'm a professor of medicine and solid tumor section head at the University of Maryland Greenbaum Comprehensive Cancer Center, where I practice as a medical oncologist. During my training at NYU School of Medicine, Yale University, and in my years of practice at Fox Chase Cancer Center, I have seen and participated in research which has resulted in tremendous progress in the care of our cancer patients. I'm glad to say Maryland has been home now for 7 years, where I continue to strive to provide the best individualized care to my patients and advance the field. Testing for cancer biomarkers has allowed me to be more successful in achieving this goal. What is biomarker testing? These are tests that are done in certified labs, which either look at levels of certain proteins on cancer cells or identify mutations in the DNA specific to cancer cells, which allow us to better understand what is driving the behavior of a patient's cancer. We now utilize clinically validated biomarkers to help to identify which therapy will be most beneficial and which treatments may not work, but would result in increased toxicity and medical costs. I have countless patient stories that illustrate how biomarker testing has allowed me to provide better care. I will share one today of a gentleman from the Eastern Shore who was originally diagnosed with lung cancer over 5 years ago and received treatment to try to achieve a cure. Over 2 years ago, the cancer returned and testing showed his tumor had high levels of a receptor known as PD-L1, which is an important biomarker to identify which cancers may respond to immunotherapy, treatments which stimulate the patient's own cancer cells to kill cancer, own immune cells to kill cancer cells. Based on this, I started treatment with an FDA-approved immunotherapy agent that had less side effects than chemotherapy. After 2 years, the cancer started growing again, and I ordered a tumor sequencing test, which showed his tumor had an alteration in a gene, KRAS G12C, which is now treatable with a well-tolerated FDA-approved pill. Today, my patient feels well, and his last CAT scan shows significant reduction in his tumors. Without appropriate biomarker testing, I would have offered chemotherapy or hospice care. Understanding the biomarkers in his cancer has allowed me to provide the best personalized care to maintain his quality of life and extend his survival. And this is the goal for all of my patients and why I support coverage for all medically appropriate biomarker testing.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Sydney Barnett. I am an internal medicine hospitalist at Anne Arundel Medical Center. 6 years ago, while I was going through my medical internship, I began wheezing. And since I had some lingering symptoms from a prior pneumonia, I decided to be seen by a pulmonologist. I had a very strong family history of asthma, so I thought that I was just coming down with adult onset asthma. An abnormality on my lung was seen, so I was sent for a battery of tests, and the results came back with me being diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. At the time, I was 33, a never smoker, a former ballet dancer, 5K runner, and an internal medicine resident. Now, I had spent a lot of time in school, and being diagnosed with that terminal disease made me think of all the time I spent in school and the fact that I probably would not be able to even live to see my dream of being a doctor and practicing. But thankfully, my oncologist sent my sample for biomarker testing, and I was found to have a mutation. And when she told me I had ALK positive lung cancer at the time, I didn't even know what the significance of that meant. And what it meant was I would not have to do chemotherapy. I would have a targeted therapy that was much better tolerated, and I wouldn't have to deal with debilitating side effects. It meant that I could continue my intern year, continue my residency, fulfill a chief residency year, and pass my boards on time with my cohort without having to take time off. It also meant that 6 months ago, when I was found to have progressed to my brain, that we knew what treatment I could be switched to and what would target my cancer. And because of that, I am a proponent for the necessity for biomarker testing because it has definitely made a remarkable effect in my life, and I believe that it will in other patients' lives. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak in support of Senate Bill 805. I'm Dr. Susan Scott. I'm an oncologist and cancer researcher at Johns Hopkins. The issue of timely biomarker testing and coverage is central to the care of our patients with cancer. Biomarkers are simply diagnostic features that help define a disease or tailor treatment. Defining cancer by the organ it started in, lung, breast, colon, this is a rudimentary classification from 100 years ago. Biomarkers encompass all of the scientific advances that move us from this ancient framework into modern cancer care. It's not a pipe dream or a new age luxury. It is the standard of care. It is what every single patient must have for appropriate diagnosis and treatment of their cancer, and what every Maryland resident facing cancer deserves. Unfortunately, insurance and infrastructure have not kept pace with the speed of medical innovation, and barriers to accessing medically necessary biomarker testing disproportionately impact the most vulnerable patients, further contributing to disparities in care. Reducing the burdens of insurance prior authorization and coverage denial will benefit all patients and promote equitable standard of care in Maryland. Every day, my patients and I rely on biomarkers like targeted DNA sequencing and PD-L1 protein assays to treat cancer. It means the difference in 6 months or 6 years to live, the difference in surgery or chemotherapy, the difference in a daily pill or hospice. Yet despite the science, we too often ask people with life-shattering diagnoses to sit and wait for prior authorization, or worse, to rely on decades-old medicine and forgo potentially life-saving treatment because we can't get them the right test. Please support this legislation that will expand patient access to biomarker testing and high-quality care for thousands of Marylanders living with cancer and other chronic conditions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Lance Kilpatrick. I'm the Maryland Government Relations Director for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. This year is estimated that over 35,000 Marylanders will hear you have cancer, and approximately 11,000 of them will sadly die from the disease. You have my written testimony, but I wanted to raise a couple things that have been brought up during the journey of this legislation. First of all, it's disappointing and frankly bewildering that Medicaid is estimated at costs of hundreds of millions of dollars. The respected actuarial firm Milliman found that the average allowed unit cost to insurers per biomarker test ranges from $79 for Medicaid up to $2.25 for large group self-insured. Their 2022 study projected that requiring robust coverage of biomarker testing would have an impact of 8 to 51 cents per month. This does not account for potential savings for avoiding ineffective treatments. Secondly, it's been raised that the legislation should only cover cancer treatments and not other diseases. But as personalized medicine continues to evolve, additional biomarker testing applications will become available to guide the treatment of comorbidities such as diabetes, cardiac conditions, renal failure in cancer patients. According to the National Cancer Institute, the top 4 cancers respectively for patients over age 66, prostate, breast, colorectal, and lung, have rates of comorbidity ranging from 30 to 53%. Covering biomarker tests, but not others, unnecessarily hinder health providers' ability to care for their patient. ACS CAN has undertaken a national multi-state campaign on this issue with numerous coalition partners. While we're having this discussion today, legislation has already passed in states as diverse as Arizona, Louisiana, Illinois, and Rhode Island, and is well on its way to being enacted in Georgia, Kentucky, and Oklahoma. None of these states have indicated a fiscal red flag when it comes to have full, robust, clinically indicated biomarker testing. We please ask for your support and passage of Senate Bill 805. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no questions from the committee, and to the sponsor, I want to thank you for your work behind the scenes on the bill. I did hear that there were some amendments coming, and so we look forward to those. I know you've been working with our colleagues in the caucus and in the House. So, oh, sorry, Senator Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to buzz in late. I guess the initial question is for the sponsor, and you had mentioned something about amendments to prior authorization. Can you just articulate what those are again? I know we've had bills dealing with prior authorization before, so just kind of piqued my attention there.
So thank you for that question, Senator. The amendments are coming fast and furious. And so that one came in recently, so I haven't really had a chance to delve into it to articulate a proper answer, so I can get back to you in the committee with that particular answer.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. You had also cited the fact that that there would be an amendment, and maybe you need to get back to me on this too, about cancer biomarkers just for Medicaid coverage, right? Is that?
No, this bill, I think, Senator, covers for all, including Medicaid.
Okay. Is there an amendment pertaining just to, maybe I misheard, Medicaid cancer biomarkers specifically, just fine-tuned to cancer biomarkers?
Okay, well, okay, the issue is Department of Health was mentioned about the huge fiscal note the Department of Health put on doing it for everyone, for every possible treatment, disease, whatever. And so we have to work with them and currently the Department of Health is working on providing medical assistance for cancer coverages. And so it's in their wheelhouse for cancer. So we want to get this done. We want to get this bill done. We want to really move it forward. As you hear folks on this panel articulate, talked about the cancers they've gone through and how biomarker testing helped them to be here today, which we really appreciate you sharing your stories. Thank you so much. And we also have to think about former President Jimmy Carter. He's 98, I believe, is in hospice. But because of advancement in these areas, they were able to target his brain cancer, really, and to really help him to really survive many years after diagnosis. So modern medicine, biomarker testing is really tremendously helpful. So we want to really get it really available for so many more citizens in Maryland who might not have the resources, but fortunately through Maryland Medical Assistance, we can provide them that resource to hopefully treat their issues and extend their lives.
Okay, and then last question, and you brought up the department in this, is because I was looking through the bill folder and I didn't see anything from the department. Maybe I just missed something, but.
Okay, no, you didn't miss it. Like I said, everything's flowing fast and furious. Their letter came in this morning, and so I don't think it's made it into the system yet. So it just came in this morning, and so we working with them to address those issues.
And is that a letter of support or is that a letter of information?
Okay, let me see what the title is, so I can find it here. I think it's a letter of information.
Okay.
But I'll share, make sure it gets on the system, get into your files.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't see any additional questions for this panel. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences with the committee, for your testimony, and We appreciate your participation. We're going to call up the next panel on this bill, so thank you very much. We're now going to call forward Ann Seacott, Amy Prentice, Matthew Celentano, and Kimberly Robinson. You can get started as soon as you're settled. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kimberly Robinson here on behalf of Cigna. And here, favorable amendments on Senate Bill 805. I want to first thank the American Cancer Society, ACS CAN, and their representatives who have worked collaboratively with the carrier community, and the amendments that the sponsor mentioned that are being worked on and been accepted in the House were the results of that collaborative work. We do cover biomarker testing. We understand its importance. We definitely believe that it's important that we keep up with the medicine, and this bill is aimed at codifying that in Maryland law. There are 3 amendments, and so I'll address them, and one of these answers will go to one of Senator Lamb's questions. The amendments do 3 things. One, they add in the term clinical utility, which is aimed at ensuring that we are looking at this from a treatment space, that we're looking for biomarkers that are going to advance the treatment or management of the disease of the individual. We know that we identify biomarkers before we yet have treatments associated with them. And so just to make it clear that the goal here is focused on treatment and management of the disease, and that as those biomarkers move from identification to actually leading to that utility, that's the point at which insurance is going to engage. We don't want to divert resources on testing where we're not going to be able to follow through with what comes next for the patient. Secondly, the amendments do remove one of the criteria that's listed in the bill, again, focusing specifically on criteria that would be evidence-based, peer-reviewed, or going to make sure that it's leading towards the science and supporting what those treatments are. We are in support of that, and so we've negotiated an amendment there. And the third is to the prior authorization question, Senator Lamb. The bill includes a prior authorization provision. It's written as a national model, and every state does not necessarily have a law like Maryland's that talks broadly about prior authorization. To make sure this is not in conflict with existing law, it will remove that. Just really quickly, Madam Chair, the House had one technical amendment to what was accepted between the parties that I know staff in the House is working on, and we'll make sure to share that with the Senate Finance staff. But from our perspective, I think we've got a very good consensus on the bill, and we were happy to work it out.
Madam Chair, I'm Ann Seacott with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and my role is really just to answer any questions that couldn't be fielded. The one thing I'll just mention is that one of the amendments that the sponsor mentioned and we're so grateful for his leadership on this. In the House, they've got 2 vehicles, and for an education and outreach program, they're actually just trying to decide which bill to put it on. So that's also just one of the reasons why you don't have that. So, but with that, we ask for a favorable report.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm Amy Prentice. And when I signed up, I was actually to respect the doctor's time, signing up on behalf of Dr. Scott, who was on our last panel. I think I put her name under organization. So my intent was not to testify myself, but just to sign up on her behalf. But thank you.
So say me too.
So me too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Matt Celentano today here on behalf of the League of Life and Health Insurers of Maryland, and I am also a Me Too.
All right, Senator Lamb.
Thank you. To the first person who testified, I apologize, Mr. Namium. You had cited the fact that there were amendments that would make alteration to the criteria, but you didn't specify what the changes in the criteria were.
Sure. That's because 2 minutes goes by really, really fast. So it's hard to answer that without, thank you, Ann. But if you look in the criteria, the last set of criteria talks about consensus statements. And so there are some feeling that the consensus statements, while important as various treatments are being assessed, for their utility, that they have not yet risen to being verified through study and through the results of such studies as to exactly where we are. So they are certainly advancing the science, but they aren't reaching the level that we are typically called on, even in Maryland's own prior authorization law today, for what really meets the threshold for what we as carriers are supposed to be basing our medical necessity decisions upon. And so to try to make sure that there wasn't going to be a dispute and creating a little firmer circle around what we were considering as we're evaluating which biomarkers are going to lead to treatment and better management of disease. This was the one criteria we negotiated with the proponents to remove from the list at this time.
So is that it looks like there were two paragraphs under the consensus statement section. You're
Correct.
Both of them or?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So both the consensus statements will be out.
Correct.
Got it. And then you'd also touched on the prior authorization. You probably ran out of time to describe it a little bit further. Are you removing the entire prior authorization section out of the bill?
From this bill, but Maryland has a prior authorization law that is controlling for all insurance benefits. There was a concern that we don't want to go down the road of writing benefit specific prior authorization standards. That's not operational or very feasible and not typical in any state. It's just not how the system works. And so to make this so it sort of aligns with how things operate in the state today, the specific language in this bill is being removed, but we have an entire law that applies.
So it's going to revert back to the existing prior.
It'll continue it'll continue under the law. That's the law of the land of Maryland. Yes.
Okay. All right. Pretty familiar with that one. Just wanted to check with Mr. Celentano. You actually support this with amendments?
We do.
Oh, I thought I misheard that.
No, I know. I'm sorry. It's easy to do that. No, but we do support it.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Seeing no additional questions from the committee, we thank you for your testimony. Thanks for hanging out with Senate Finance. That is our last bill on the agenda today, colleagues. We're going to take a quick break and come back and do some voting. So thank you all very much.